Hey kid. Yeah, you. I just got off the phone with the big man upstairs, and he told me that I need to clear a few things up around here. So without further ado, here's 10 pieces of malarkey that you might still be spreading. Number 1. Nobody was ever burned to death at the Salem witch trials. Of the accused, 15 died in prison, 19 were hanged, and 1 was squished to death. That last one is way more interesting than any cremation, by the way. Dude was a badass. His name was Giles Corey. He was 81 years old and so done with the town of Salem's garbage that he wouldn't even dignify the trial with a plea. So the town stuck in between 2 boards and stacked rocks on top of him in an effort to draw out a confession. But every time they tried to get something out of him, all he would say was, "More weight." This went on for 3 solid days until he finally died, never giving any indication as to whether or not he was a witch. One can only wonder. Number 2, the OG Buddha wasn't the obese guy. That's Budai, a Chinese folk character meant to represent Maitreya, aka future Buddha. Now this shirt is double sad. Number 3, Buddha wasn't a god either. He was just a guy named Gautama. Now this shirt is triple sad. Number 4. Ever heard of a vomitorium? Turns out no, it's not a place where Roman nobles would go to make room for more pheasant spleen and lobster eyelids. It's just a big entranceway to the Colosseums that hordes of peasants would spew out of. Number 5. Washington never cut down a cherry tree in his youth. I don't get this one at all. Apparently it's supposed to paint the man in a good light somehow. It's like, Tyler, what the hell happened while we were gone? Where's the tree in the front yard? Oh yeah, that was me. Got bored. Just felt like vandalizing something, you know? Hey, what about my honest character? Number 6, the pyramids weren't actually built by slaves. These workers were respected members of society. They ate meat and worked in 3-month shifts, and even got to be buried right next to the tomb after their death. Matter of fact, that's more than we can say for the people working on man's greatest achievements today. If I spent years of my life helping to build the space station, you're damn right I'd want the Salmonella Memorial Corpse Receptacle floating along right next to it. That would be amazing. Number 7, the Great Wall of China is not the only man-made object visible from space. I don't know where you dipshits got this one from. First of all, there's no way you could see it with the unaided eye. The wall is like 30 meters thick at most, while the distance to outer space is generally recognized to be 100 kilometers up, known as the Kármán line. To give some perspective, that's like me holding up a standard-sized guitar pick from across the entire length of a football field and asking you what color it is. Also, there are plenty of man-made objects that are way bigger in terms of local surface area than the Great Wall, so even if it was visible, there's no way it would be the only one. Number 8, you might have heard this one before. You know, Hitler was a jerk and all, but hey, he made the Autobahn, so at least he was efficient. Actually, Hitler didn't create the Autobahn. It was already there. He just helped expand it into newer territory. In a similar vein, Mussolini didn't make the trains run on time, with most of Italy's infrastructure repairs happening before his rise to power in 1922, and even then they weren't nearly as punctual as he'd like you to believe. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to find something else to like about these fascists. Like Hitler's elegant way of speaking. Or the way Mussolini says spaghetti. Paschetti! Number 9, Iron Maidens weren't actual torture devices used in medieval times. Basically what happened is, some archaeologists in the 1800s saw an old metal coffin and some spikes, and said, yo, wouldn't it be wildin' if we put these things up in here, so that way if someone goes in it, they get poked in their bits? You are a sick man, Cornelius. I like it. Into the museum it goes. At least Iron Maiden was real. They were as real as it gets. Still are. And don't you forget it. Number 10, Einstein never failed math. He had mastered both integral and differential calculus by the age of 15. 99% chance this one was just made up to make glue eaters feel better about themselves. Well, congratulations, Dimitri. Looks like you failed pre-algebra for the 3rd time. Brady still can't graduate. Well, hey, that means I'm still on par with famous smart science man, so yeah, worship me. Anyway, till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, you're probably familiar with at least a few characters whose obsessive penny pinching truly knows no bounds. Yes, from Ebenezer Scrooge to Scrooge McDuck, nobody hoards money quite like misers. But these guys aren't the most miserly misers out there, not by a long shot. First of all, look at their top hats, their extravagant use of glasses, their luxurious chairs. These things are worth their weight in precious shekels. No true miser would waste their wealth on such frills. Second of all, these guys aren't real. They're fictional characters. Scrooge McDuck does not exist. I don't care what CNN says, it's all liberal conspiracy bullshit.
I mean, look at this article by the Huffington Post. You mean to tell me that this picture isn't photoshopped? Ridiculous. But you know who was real? One Daniel Dancer of London, England. Born in 1716, Daniel's father died at a young age, leaving behind a large agricultural estate for Daniel to oversee. When it was first inherited, the property brought in a few £100s a year, which doesn't sound like much today, but given that a general laborer could be expected to make around £19 per year in 1710, it's safe to say that Dancer could afford to live a fairly lavish lifestyle off his passive income alone. But Dan was like, you know, all this food and clothing and stuff is alright, but you know what I really like? Owning money. Say, how much does a pound cost? Well, that's a complicated question, Daniel. Can currency really be said to have intrinsic value? Some economists believe that— TLDR, please. They cost a pound. Jesus, that's a lot. I better start saving. Thus began one of the most intentionally frugal lifestyles history has ever seen. Let me walk you through a few of Dancer's day-to-day habits. First of all, soap, don't even think about it. The closest thing to bathing that Daniel did was during the summer months when, once or twice a week, he'd wade into the nearby pond and scrub his face with a handful of sand. Say what you will, but what he lacked in deodorization, he certainly made up for in exfoliation. Admittedly, all of London probably reeked to high hell back then, so while Daniel's smell might not have tipped people off to his eccentricity, his clothes almost certainly did. On a good day, he'd be seen in one of his coats, which were homemade patchwork abominations of various garments that Dancer found on the streets and local dust heaps, looking like a walking dementia patient sewing circle. Similarly, all his shoes were either scavenged or Frankensteined out of other pairs of shoes he already owned, with the whole ensemble being barely held together with haphazardly tied bands made of the hay grown on his estate. In fact, a lot of the time, he'd ditch normal clothes altogether and just wear the hay. To his credit, in his youth, Daniel was known to purchase a whole 2 shirts per year as his clothing expense, but one day he looked in the mirror and said, "Daniel, you're bleeding funds like a stuck pig. It's time to grow up and get your act together," and cut his budget to only 1 shirt per year. One of the few people that Daniel associated with regularly was his sister, whom he lived with. Believe it or not, she shared in a lot of Daniel's tight-fisted habits, and it definitely showed. She was described as, quote, having more the appearance of a walking dunghill than one of the fair sex. Couldn't have said it better myself, honestly. Dancer prepared all of his food for the upcoming week ahead of time, consisting of only 14 hard dumplings and 3 pounds of beef stretched out over the entire 7-day period. Every day, he'd eat only a single meal that was basically equivalent to 2 wads of dried out dough and 1.5 quarter-pounder patties from McDonald's. He kept this habit up for years without fail, except for one time when he stumbled upon a fully intact, rotting sheep carcass during his daily stroll. He was like, "Good lord, this is just obscene. Who would leave a perfectly good pile of arguably edible meat and organs just sitting around like this?" So he dragged the thing home and made him and his sister a nice big pile of spoiled mutton pies, which they subsisted off of for several weeks. That's a real life hack right there. Who needs refrigeration if it's already rancid, am I right? Despite Daniel's rabid fear of any unnecessary spending, he did own a dog named Bob that he was quite fond of. At this point, I'm almost certain that Dancer just decided to base his entire life off of linoleum by no effect, which is pretty incredible considering linoleum wasn't even invented for another 100 years. Anyway though, one day, Daniel's neighbor came to complain about how Bob had been harassing his sheep. So Daniel said, "Don't worry boy, I ain't gonna kill you." But we don't want a lawsuit on our hands, do we? No we don't. What would we do if a lawyer came around here, huh? That's right, and make his children watch, yeah. So he decided to take the dog to the local farrier, which is basically a blacksmith that specializes in horseshoes and the like. "Hey, could you make my dog, like, not have teeth anymore?" What kind of business you think I'm running here, boy? Come on, man, you file down horses' hooves for a living. Teeth are just tiny mouth hooves. That's close. Sorry, buddy, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Well, got me there. Say, what's a hand grenade? None of my sources say what happened to the dog after his untimely nubbening, but I do know Dan never got sued, so I guess the operation was a success. Daniel's sister passed away in 1766, leaving him so distraught that he actually went out of his way to buy mourning clothes for her funeral. And by that I mean he bought a pair of secondhand black stockings, and that's it. Still, that's a big deal when it comes to the likes of Dancer. At this point, the only person close to a friend that Dancer had was a woman known as Lady Tempest. She was so influential over him that she was actually able to convince him to buy, get this, a 1 shilling hat. This was quite an accomplishment, as Daniel's last hat was older than half of you at 14 years old. What? I'm not. You don't. Meow. You. Of course, the next time Lady Tempest went to hang out with him, he was still wearing his old disgusting hat. When questioned about the one he bought, he goes, "Oh yeah, that frilly old thing. Sold it for a 6 pence profit. Super easy too. I tell you, forget house flipping. Hat flipping is going to be the cool new thing pretty soon." Lo and behold, 250 years later, he was wrong. Daniel died at the ripe old age of 78, which seems pretty shocking considering the whole not using soap, eating rotten food thing, but I guess his near total isolation from other people made up for that when it came to preventing illness. Though he never ended up shelling out any of the massive hoard of wealth that he accumulated over this time, his efforts weren't completely in vain. By the time he passed away, Daniel's estate was now pulling in about £3,000 in yearly net revenue, 10 times the amount it earned when he first inherited it. So, moral of the story, parsimony has its place. While it's good to save money, don't torture yourself just for the sake of a few bucks. Next time your parent or significant other insists on turning down the thermostat or keeping the windows up to save gas, just say, "Hey, are we human or are we dancer?" Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, it's Misk Monday, so I'm going to tell you all a story from my childhood. I was in 5th grade at the time, about 10 or 11. I was in that YMCA aftercare program at my school, you know, where they watch kids for a while before their parents pick them up, right? So the story centers around 2 other kids there. One was a 5th grader, we'll call him Carl, and the other was a 1st grader, we'll call him Tyrone. So to preface, Tyrone was a bit odd. He didn't talk much, he was always just kinda looking around, but generally he was a good kid. So one day I'm sitting there, minding my own business, when I see Carl walk into the bathroom. And then about 10 seconds later, I see Tyrone follow him in there. I didn't really think anything of it until I hear Carl shout from inside the bathroom. I look over and Tyrone comes running out crying. So the counselors ask him what happened. Tyrone points at Carl and says, "He pushed me." They asked Carl if it was true, and Carl gives the full explanation of what actually went down in the bathroom. So it turns out Carl was just at the urinal, minding his own business, when Tyrone walks in, walks right up to him, and starts poking him on the balls while he's peeing. So Carl, who was still, midstream, couldn't really use his hands to stop him, so he reflexively did this sort of hip check to push the kid away. The kid hits the ground, immediately starts crying, and runs out of the bathroom. So the counselors excused Carl and politely asked Tyrone what he was doing touching an older boy's nads. Tyrone replies, I just wanted to make sure he got all the pee out. So ultimately, it just ended with the counselors explaining to him that you shouldn't touch other people's junk. I'm just glad he decided to pull this sort of thing now in a public school to another kid. Imagine if he did this in a public restroom. It would have probably ended with some guy getting arrested. Thankfully, Tyrone never touched another sack again, as far as I know. Hey kids, it's Tips Tuesday. So today I'm giving you a beginner's guide on how to unicycle. Alright, let's do this. Tips Tuesday. Step number 1, buying a unicycle. This part's pretty easy. I got mine on Amazon. You are gonna want to pick the proper size, however, based on your height. I'm lanky as a fucking Kong, so I got a 24-inch. If you on the shorter side, go for the 20-inch. If you under 13, well, you probably shouldn't be on my channel. But if you are, go for the 16-inch. They're generally only around $60 or $70, mostly because they're basically just a wheel and a seat, so that's a plus. Step number 2, assembly. Okay, you can probably do this part on your own. They give you directions in the box, so I'm not going to waste your time with this. However, you do want to make sure your pedals are on the correct way. If you put them on backwards, it could make it so they unscrew while you're riding. Trust me, I learned the hard way. Step number 3, mounting. Kids, a unicycle is like a woman. It's not hard to get to know a good unicycle, especially if you've got lots of money. But if you want to mount it, that's still going to require some skill on your part. In my experience, however, I found that those things that are hardest to mount are oftentimes the most rewarding. You see this tricycle? This tricycle's a whore. It has a poor relationship with its father, and it does not deserve your respect. Unicycles, that's where the real men play. Here's how you do it. First off, find something to hold on to. Trust me, you're gonna need it. Could be a car, or a trash bin, or Jay Leno's chin. I used my basement's low ceiling. If you can reach yours, I highly recommend it. Next, rotate the wheel so that one pedal is at the bottommost point. That's where your first foot's gonna go. Once you got all your weight on that foot, put the other one into place. As you do so, you will find yourself being placed upon the seat. Now guys, remember how I said a unicycle is like a woman? Well, forget that for a moment, because you want your junk to have as little involvement with the unicycle as possible. Remember in middle school you learned about levers? Well, you're gonna want to use your taint as a fulcrum on the seat in order to maintain your balance. Too far back, you're gonna fall over. Too far forward, you're just gonna castrate yourself. So be careful. Step number 4, riding. Okay, remember my woman metaphor? That's back on. When you're riding a unicycle, you require great balance, as well as a steady rhythm. Also, you're probably not gonna last too long your first few times, just FYI. If you prefer, you can deflate your tires a little when you're first learning, cause a flabby unicycle might not let you go as fast, but they're certainly easier to ride. Anyway though, riding a uni is a lot like riding a bike. Except instead of just balancing on your left-right axis, you gotta worry about your front-back axis as well. So you on a bike, you wanna turn right, you lean right, right? Same with every direction on a unicycle. If you wanna go forward, in addition to pedaling, you gotta lean forward. For your first few goes, you're probably gonna wanna hold on to something. This ain't called a crash course for nothing. Fortunately with the uni, it's very easy to dismount whenever things go wrong. Out of hundreds of failures, I personally only ever landed face first around 2 or 3 times. Above all, keep practicing. Eventually, kids, you'll be like that stupid-ass frog meme that everybody hates. And remember, riding a uni is like riding half a bike. You only half forget. Sure.
Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about some of the strangest rules, regulations, and ordinances from around the globe. Our first one comes from the United Kingdom. In 1986, Parliament passed what is known as the Salmon Act, which, among other things, made it illegal to handle salmon in suspicious circumstance, whatever that means. Oh shit. Police! Is that fucking fish Jenga? No! Here's another. In many Caribbean countries, it's illegal for a civilian to wear camouflage clothing in public. In other words, you're only allowed to wear really good camouflage. The USA has its fair share of dumb laws, most of which exist on the state level. For example, in Oklahoma, you can be arrested for making an ugly face at a dog. Knowing the average panhandler, it's fortunate that this law doesn't get enforced much, or else half the state would have to brown bag it just by default. And we can check this off. Looking good. Moving on. In the state of Florida, and I don't really know why they'd have to enforce this one, it's considered unlawful to have sex with a porcupine. Police! Hey, guys, it's cool. I'm actually a hedgehog. Oh. Carry on. Another good Florida law, this one really cakes the cake. It's illegal for an unmarried female to go skydiving on Sunday. This is how I imagine that law coming into being, right? We need to ban skydiving. Why is that? The sky is God's domain. Us mortals have no right playing in it. I'm pretty sure God doesn't care about people jumping out of planes for fun. Okay, but how about we just ban people God doesn't like from skydiving, like unwed women? That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. What if it's also the Lord's Day? Okay, that's fair. This next one comes from Russia, where homophobia is fairly commonplace. As one can imagine, gay marriage is a big no-no over there. But in 2013, Vladimir Putin took things a step further, and made it illegal to even tell children that gay people exist. Bolshevik привет, бабушка. Balaklava Soviet Cossack, Kremlin Boyar, Gulag Rasputin, Rubel Anesthesia, Tetris Borscht, Red October. Dostoevsky. Stalingrad Kalishnikov Vodka Adidas Track Pant. Suka blyat. Apparently though, that's not the weirdest rule to come out of a former red state. In China, it's actually illegal to reincarnate without the government's permission. Like a lot of Chinese policies, this law was mostly just put in place to piss off Tibet. Still though, I can see there being a lot of unforeseen consequences here. Come in. Sir, we found this cat in one of the local temples. We suspect it might have been a Buddhist in a past life. Huh. Better execute it just to be safe. By your orders, Captain. Mao. Wait a minute, did you hear that? Mao. There it is again. He said Mao. Oh my god. That must be Chairman Mao reincarnated. Sorry, sir, but the orders have already been given. No! Jesus Christ, you just killed our glorious leader. Oh god, you're right. What have I done?
Come in. Sir, we found another cat. Meow. Holy shit, that was fast. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Ella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, you know what's cool? Etymology. Etymology. There we go. Today we're going to talk about some words, some combinations thereof, and where they come from. First is the phrase white elephant. Now for those out of the loop, a white elephant is a possession which its owner cannot dispose of and whose cost, particularly that of maintenance, is out of proportion to its usefulness. And also a game played during the holidays for people who prefer random garbage over actual personalized presents. According to legend, this saying dates back to the monarchs of Siam. Whenever one of the king's courtiers drew his displeasure through whatever means, he would offer them a gift of a white elephant. It was considered the ultimate insult to refuse a gift from the king, so naturally the elephantee would be forced to accept. Now if you know elephants as well as I do, you would know that they are frickin' gigantic. They can consume around 50 gallons of water and 500 pounds of foliage every day, which would be quite expensive to keep up in modern times, let alone hundreds of years ago. Plus these ones are albino, so you have to hose them down with SPF 30 once an hour or else they'll turn into one big tumor. Okay, not really, but they definitely needed their shade. Also, Southeast Asian cultures considered white elephants sacred, so you weren't allowed to make the animal work, and you'd have to hire a load of people to care for it on a daily basis. Basically, the person getting the gift would have to choose between financial ruin or letting it die and being socially ostracized and possibly even killed. I thought this whole thing was pretty clever, so I've started doing my own version. Whenever someone gets on my nerves, I spray paint progressive comments all over their house. That way, they'll have to spend the whole day angrily scrubbing it off, and then the neighbors will be like, "Wait, does that mean he likes the N-word? Bigoted scum." Next is balls to the wall. This one harkens back to the days when planes flew in the air. The throttle of many aircrafts would be controlled with either a lever or a plunger, either of which were often topped with a sphere for easy handling. Thus, when you wanted to throw the plane into max thrust, you'd put the balls to the wall. In a similar vein, the phrase balls deep comes from pinball machines. When you want to launch the ball full force, you pull the plunger all the way back, otherwise known as going balls deep. Nah, just kidding. That one actually means what you think it does. Next is getting your goat, a phrase used when someone or something annoys you. The origin of this phrase is still disputed by etymologists, but one theory traces back to the sport of horse racing. In order to stop horses from getting nervous before a race, their owners would stick a goat in the stables to keep them calm. Apparently the presence of a goat has some kind of therapeutic effect on horses, kinda like a therapy dog, except they can't pet it on account of hooves, so they just sniff it for a while, I guess. Cut to a pack of young hooligans looking for something to do besides bootlegging and getting polio. They decide to break into the stables at night and escort the goat to an undisclosed location. Then when the race starts, instead of running straight ahead like a normal person, the horse would run into the crowd and dropkick a grandma or whatever, and the old crotchety oil tycoon who owns the horse would stand up, shaking his cane, yelling, "Those punks really get my goat." Thanks to modern medicine, anxious horses today can instead be given horsey Xanax to calm them down, which unfortunately means that the days of hot-blooded goat getting are over. However, some would argue that stealing horse tranquilizers can be equally rewarding in its own way. But enough of that mumbo-jumbo. Hey, speaking of which, you ever wonder where mumbo-jumbo comes from? Nice segue, Sam. Thanks, Sam. Anyway, strap in kids, this one's gonna be good. Mumbo Jumbo originates from the Mandingo people of West Africa. The Mandingos were a polygamous culture, and whenever a domestic quarrel broke out, they would soon hear animalistic screaming coming from the woods. They look over, and out runs this guy, known as Mumbo Jumbo. Now Mumbo Jumbo's arrival was considered a big deal to the Mandingo. The whole tribe would sing and dance in the town center until midnight, at which point Mr. Jumbo would settle the dispute. And by settle the dispute, I mean tie the female to a post and slap her upside the head with a stick for an hour, while the rest of the village watched, all hootin' and a-hollerin'. And then he'd run screaming back into the woods, where he would remain until the next complaint arose. What the Mandingo women didn't know is that Mumbo Jumbo is not, in fact, a wild patriarchal deity from the forest, but merely the offending woman's husband or one of his friends wearing a costume made from tree bark and leaves. Anyway, the guy would be babbling nonsense the whole time, which is where the phrase Mumbo Jumbo is derived from. So next time one of your superiors uses the words Mumbo Jumbo in a jocular fashion, remember to report them to HR for promoting African wife beating. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Ella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, I just woke up from a nap I took in January of 2020, and boy are my arms tired. Let's see what I missed. Queen's dead, war in Ukraine, the Taliban's back. What is... Holy shit! They made a movie called Scoob! Unprecedented global pandemic, Space Jam 2, some popular guy named Brandon. Yep, that just about covers it. Anyway, we all know about the scientific names of animals, but did you ever wonder what they actually mean? To find out, we must look to taxonomists. They're the guys responsible for the systems of nomenclature we use to classify organisms, and boy are they convoluted. First you got the big 8, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I've seen plenty of mnemonic devices for this, but since the D just showed up in the 90s and is still disputed by some scientists, he's usually not included. So allow me to suggest a few. Dizzy kids puke cereal on fairground staff. Dumb kittens pushing cups over feeds growing spite. Donkey Kong's fucking serendipitously. The way this whole thing works differs slightly depending on which kingdom you pick, so today we'll be sticking to the animal one cause that one's the coolest and I'm in it. So what constitutes each taxon is pretty arbitrary. They basically just serve to act as another set of branches in the tree that taxonomists build. The one exception is species, which is generally defined as any group of animals that can have babies with each other that aren't sterile freaks. Mule, liger, zedonk, skunk ape, they can live fulfilling lives, but they're all shooting blanks so they don't count. On the other hand, in our innumerable trespasses against God, we can make things like chidandanes, which actually work, so dogs are dogs are dogs. Besides species though, it's the Wild West in here. Plenty of times, 8 tiers isn't even enough for scientists, so they just stick new sublevels in between. Legions, cohorts, tribes, series, divisions, and if you want to keep going, you can throw all kinds of prefixes on any of these for even more layers. There's even subspecies, which the more pedantic of you may think to yourselves that creating names for subspecies at all kind of undermines the single somewhat agreed upon definition in the whole tree. To that, my friends, taxonomists say, But while that's pretty complex, the actual names themselves are pretty easy to wrap your head around. Though taxonomists may hide behind their fancy Greek and Latin, the Vulgate is no substitute for wit. Now, I've scraped through the scientific names of a load of species, and most of them can be split into a few categories. The simplest ones are the animals that already have names in Greek or Latin. It's a lion, I'm calling it Leo. Done. Tiger, it's a tigris. Cat, it's a catus. Easy. Multi-word names can be translated the same way. For the golden eagle, we got Aquila chrysaetos. Gold eagle eagle. They decided to be a show-off and do eagle in Greek and Latin. Essentially the same though. But if a species is too specific or exotic for a one-to-one translation, that's when you gotta get a little creative. A lot of the time, inspiration comes from just giving the creature the old once-over and pointing out some cool-looking body part. Generally, the more distinct of an identifying feature it is, the more likely it'll get in the name. For example, Homeboy took one look at this thing and said, "Yup, red triangle slug. I'm going on break." We call this thing a fucking unicorn, almost like that means one horn or something. Also, some guy deadass looked at an octopus and said, well, all they got is heads and feet. I'ma call them headfoot. And now biologists everywhere say cephalopod unironically. Matter of fact, if it's got feet, chances are that's part of its name somewhere. You got 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, 2 feet, equal feet, both feet, double feet, stomach feet, lip feet, sucker feet, wing feet, big feet, slow feet, or feet, both feet, joint feet, no feet, 10,000 feet, cow's feet, spade feet, cat feet, small feet. If it doesn't look that interesting, another thing to point out is where you found it. This could be a territory like American bear or Siamese crocodile, or just a habitat like woods macaque or toilet rat. But that's boring. We need to look at the men behind the magic and what drives and motivates them. Now, if there's one thing that the scientific community loves, it's clout. And there's no better way to go down in history than plastering your own name on some shit you found. But not all fields have the same volume of things to scribble the old John Hancock over. On the one end, you got physicists just making up their own slightly different form of ionizing radiation measurement, and even then only the top dogs got away with it. Now zoology, any little goober flouncing through the underbrush can say, this one has 13 spots, but the one in the book's only got 11. I will call him Splinkus's ladybird. Alternatively, plenty of biologists have given shoutouts to their contemporaries, both other biologists and those across the academic gamut, from geologists to physicists to explorers and more. Naturally, Darwin's got a shitload, but even the background characters get immortalized one way or another. Who are Thompson, Grant, Summering, Erlanger, Speke, and Cuvier? I don't know, but they've all got gazelles, so they must be pretty cool. Of course, other times the name checks go to people who had fuck all to do with anything except for one taxonomist being a fan of theirs. Plenty of popular celebrities have species named after them, but since all the big cute stuff was found and branded a while ago, most of these idols are commemorated through repulsive little invertebrates. You got Scaptia, Beyonce. The only similarity I can gather here is queen bee, looks like a bee, both not a real bee. There's Anomphis, Theophilus Jagarius, an old stone named after an old stone. In 2007, one Jason Bond, a professor of biology at UC Davis, dubbed this little dude Myrmecia Neil Youngie to honor his favorite musician, which caused my man Stephen Colbert to go on TV and profess his utter indignation at not having a spider named after himself. So naturally, the next year, Bond actually went on the Colbert Report to announce the naming of apostachus Stephen Colbert. So, if that gives any of you epic biologists out there any ideas, I wouldn't be opposed. Please, I would do anything. For the love of God, I'll even take a lichen. The world of politics is by no means immune to this phenomenon. Obama alone has fucking 9, as do a load of other presidents. Trump's got a moth with funny hair, Bush has a fungus beetle, Reagan's a wasp, Carter's got a darter, and so forth. Even Austria's most famous painter got the honor through this blind cave beetle. Mind you, it was 1933, so you can only blame the guy a tiny bit. Hitler actually wrote him a letter saying, "Oh, thank you, my little entomolomensch," and then went on to do, Hitler things. Fun fact, not only was this beetle stuck with just about the worst name you could have, it's also now facing extinction solely because of its value to Nazi memorabilia collectors. Guess old habits die hard. Fictional characters have their fair share of species under their belt. On the topic of evil beetles, this one's named after Darth Vader because he kinda looks like his helmet, I guess. This was actually named by the same guy who did the Bush one and belongs to the same genus. There's also this mite, genus Darth Vaderum, which is a lot more accurate and frightening. In 2012, a single bone from above the eye socket of a hitherto unidentified theropod dinosaur was being studied. And suddenly, under the light of the full moon, the guy working with the specimen had his neck covered with hair and his lips clench into a pog and his endocrine system filled with soy, and he said, "It's just like the eye of Sauron." And then he started chewing on Funko Pops and sweating cream of meme and snorting G Fuel and shitting D20s everywhere until the prostate stimulation made him. The dino's genus is now Sauroniops, from Eye of Sauron. This spider was named after Godric Gryffindor because it looks like the Sorting Hat. SpongeBob has not a sponge, but a fungus. The legendary birds from Pokemon each have their own, you guessed it, beetle, and the list goes on. Scientists are nerds. Who knew? Anyway, while this all seems kind of chaotic, there is some method to the madness. One rule is the principle of priority. This states that once somebody publishes their chosen name for a species for the first time, that's the name, and other taxonomists typically can't change it. This has led to plenty of misnomers coined by whoever got their foot in the door first, particularly in the case of the guys doing this stuff before we had the luxury of genetic analysis. Here's one. Red panda? Nah. Shining cat, coined in 1825. To be fair, they're actually about as close to cats as they are to actual pandas, so whatever. Here's 2. Capsicum chinense. Eaten there? Sure. Native? Only off by around half a globe, where literally all hot peppers came from. This principle holds true even if someone thinks they found a new species, only to later discover that it was already named. For example, in 1824, one John Edward Gray documented the plain zebra, calling it Equus burchellii, or Burchell's horse, named after a renowned naturalist of the day. Little did he know, back in 1785, some other douche classified this character as the quagga. The last quagga died in a Dutch prison in 1883. So, why do we care? Well, in the 2000s, scientists decided to scrape some gunk off a dry quagga pelt and study its DNA. And from that they realized, wait a minute, apparently this guy and zebras could have, made a little plaid in the hay together. So technically they're one species. And today they're both called quagga. Sounds kinda asinine, but then again so does asinus, and that worked out fine. Just to maintain the distinction, the extinct subspecies was renamed quagga quagga, so you know it's the real quagga. This double naming convention has been done with a lot of subspecies, in fact. Wild horse, spotted panther, or my favorite, gorilla. Just like, yeah, it's the gorillest gorilla that ever gorilled. Fuck you want from me. A closely related rule also states that the names of all taxa have to be unique. So if 2 people coincidentally name any taxon the same thing, the older one gets to stay and the new one gets the boot. Like if you saw a genus called echidna, you'd think it was, an echidna, right? Well no, that'd make too much sense. For a while it was true, from 1797 to 1811. Then it was pointed out that someone else already called a genus of moray eels echidna back in 1788. So the real echidna had to be changed to Tachyglossus, or quick tongue. Then a decade later, a dude did the same thing for a genus of vipers. Another 22 years passed, people discovered the same thing, and they were renamed to Bitis cause they bit us. That one at least made a bit of sense given that the original echidna from Greek mythology was half lady, half snake, but who cares at this point. Anyway, I've just barely scraped the surface of all the goofy names out there, so feel free to post more down below. That's all I've got for now. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I'll see ya in 2025. Don't say it, don't think it, don't say it, don't think it.
Hey kids, if you you've been on Earth for any amount of time, you should know that this place is pretty wet and wild. With water just falling from the sky whenever it feels like it, it's no surprise that floods are among nature's most common means of wrecking humanity's hard work. However, not every flood has been made out of plain old H2O. Today, we're going to talk about some of the few non-water liquid disasters that mankind has endured. January 15th, 1919 was a particularly warm day for Boston, at around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the freezing temperatures of the past week. Men wore their hats a little less snugly, children huddled about the fire a little less closely, and a metal tank containing 2.3 million gallons of molasses decided to collapse. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sam, I've never even held a molasses before. I didn't know there was 2.3 million gallons of it in the world. What was that much molasses doing in one place? Well, young grasshopper, as with most things, the answer is alcohol. As the cylinder came tumbling down, it unleashed a delicious brown tsunami that was 25 feet high at its peak. Also, forget everything you know about idioms, because the waves were recorded to have moved as fast as 35 miles per hour. That means you're slower than molasses. Nerd. Add that to the fact that molasses is way more dense than water, and you've got a recipe for some major destruction. Eyewitness accounts of the event describe houses being swept off their foundation and subsequently demolished. The level of damage was comparable to a tornado sweeping through, its path of devastation stretching a half-mile long. Here's a picture of, something. I can't tell what it was supposed to be. All I know is that molasses clearly does not play. That's not all, though. A truck was picked up and chucked into the harbor, a train car got knocked off its tracks, and a bunch of dogs and horses just straight up drowned. Oh, and some people, too. Around 150 were injured and 21 were killed in the disaster. Talk about the sweet release of death, am I right? Ha ha! A couple of reasons these numbers were so high were that A, once you're stuck in something that thick and sticky, you're kind of fucked unless 3 guys with a rope happen to show up. And B, the affected area was so large that 3 guys with a rope would have no way to get to you without getting trapped themselves. As a result, rescuers had to wait several days before the molasses either sufficiently drained out of an area or hardened up enough in the sun and the cold so that it could be walked on without sinking in. After the incident, cleanup was carried out primarily by blasting the streets with salt water, which took many weeks and stained the waters of the Boston Harbor brown for months. Naturally, all the rescue workers and cleanup crew ended up getting molasses all over them, which led to them getting the stuff all over payphones, subway cars, door handles, you name it. It's said that for decades afterwards, residents could still catch a whiff of molasses outside during the summer months, and Boston remains one of Forbes' top 10 stickiest places to this day. Our next tale took place on the evening of June 18th, 1875 in Dublin. A fire had been raging across several blocks of the city for many hours prior, and like many of us do after a long hard day of wreaking havoc, the fire decided to mosey on over to the malt house for a much needed drink. Around 5,000 barrels of whiskey and other social lubricants subsequently burst from the heat, sending a cascade of what is essentially liquid fuel careening out into the street, carrying the inferno on its back wherever it went. Now normally you think people would just run away from the impending danger, but being that this is Ireland, the crowds of people had a better idea. They said, hey fellow upstanding citizens, why don't we band together and help with the cleanup efforts? So they decided to dispose of the river of beverage running through their neighborhood by hiding it safely away in their stomachs. Some people drank directly from the street, while the classier among them were seen taking off their nasty sweat-filled boots, filling them up and just gulping away. Keep in mind, while today's version is flavored primarily with cinnamon, this Fireball whiskey contained a special blend of spices including ash, street filth, tiny shards of glass and wood, and whatever else you could imagine. But hey, free drinks are free drinks. In the end, 13 people perished as a result of this incident. Was it from the fire? Nope. Smoke inhalation? Drowning? Still no. Unfortunately, though they did boot, and they did rally, they forgot to do both at once. As a result, all 13 deaths were actually from alcohol poisoning caused by chugging too much runaway liquor. So let this be a lesson, kids. Don't drink street booze. You have no idea where it's been. Just go to a dispensary instead. Moving along, here's another potation inundation, this time on the other aisle. 1814 London was a rapidly growing metropolis, and like all metropolises, it had its fair share of densely populated slums, one of which was St. Giles Rookery. And what better place is there to build a brewery than amongst the impoverished and thirsty? Unfortunately, said brewery apparently got cocky and decided to skimp out on their iron rings that hold up the big beer things budget, leading to one of the vats completely collapsing and knocking over all the others with it. In total, around 323,000 imperial gallons, or 1.5 million liters of beer were unleashed that day. The flood of ale pushed over the wall of the brewery with the same ease that Jared Kushner pushes old ladies down escalators, gushing out into the streets and totally demolishing multiple homes situated nearby. Good morning, America. I'm reporter Pat Lauer. No relation, don't worry. We're here at the scene of the world's biggest party foul. Ma'am, how does this whole thing make you feel? Ha, don't worry. This isn't the first time alcohol has torn my household apart. In all seriousness, my husband has struck me on multiple occasions. At least 8 people are known to have died as a result of the incident, either from drowning or from having their house dropped on them. In spite of this, nobody was held responsible for the disaster, with courts concluding that the collapse was an act of God. I wish people were that lenient with act of God clauses today, like, alright, here's your coffee, ma'am. Whoops. Jesus Christ, it burns! Yes. That was Jesus Christ who did that. You motherfucker, my legs are fusing together! Hey, God works in mysterious ways. Maybe you were supposed to be a mermaid, who knows? So, I hope the knowledge of these events will serve to empower you in your life going forward. If you find one of your friends trapped in molasses, now you'll say, don't worry, I'll save you. In a couple days. If your street is ever flooded with hard liquor, you'll say, oh boy, time to start chugging. In moderation, of course. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, it's Food Friday, so today's lesson is on the history of sushi. Sushi first came into existence in Japan around the 8th century. It consisted of gutted, salted fish stored in fermented rice. You know, this half-rotting rice is good and all, but I can still smell things. Yeah, and I'm not having nearly as much diarrhea as I would like to be. What should we do? Raw fish. Raw fish, I was thinking exactly the same thing. God, we are so in sync. Nah, but actually, the rice wasn't meant to be eaten. It was only used as a means of preservation. You see, the fermenty juices of the rice would soak into the fish and prevent it from spoiling. However, as semi-rancid food often does, it would also impart a sour taste on the fish. That's where the name sushi comes from, an antiquated Japanese term for sour tasting. Also, it smelled like death. The odor is described as an extremely pungent cross between blue cheese, fish, and vinegar. Man, I'm mad. Why's that? I smelled something down the road. Thought a new sushi vendor was in town. Turns out it was just a hobo taking a piss on a tuna sandwich. Later on, during the late Edo period, people started pickling the rice, which drastically shortened the required fermentation time. So now, rather than smelling like blue cheese, fish, and vinegar, it just smelled like fish and vinegar. Go figure. People found this rice to be much more palatable, so it began to be eaten alongside the fish. Sheet seaweed was also invented around 1750, which allowed the contemporary sushi roll to take form around this time. Toss in a couple vegetables, and you've got something much more resemblant to today's sushi. During the late 19th century, many Japanese emigrated to America to escape the imperial takeover of Japan, which was known as the Meiji Restoration. It just so happens that they brought the concept of sushi with them, which enjoyed brief popularity among the upper class during the turn of the 20th century. However, coinciding with the imperial takeover was the fact that Japan started being kind of a dick. Hey, freedom is gay. What did you just say? Yeah, your way of life is for pussies. Oh yeah? Guess we'll just stop eating your dumb fucking fish roll things then. Hey, fuck you, you cheeseburger slut. I'll nuke your bitch ass. Wait, what is nuke? 40 years, you'll see. And thus, sushi lost its place in the West. Cut to the early 1960s. World War II tensions are mostly gone, and refrigeration is everywhere. This allowed sushi to again rise in America, this time for good. By the 1980s, sushi restaurants were everywhere, especially along the West Coast. But as you can imagine, American sushi saw significant alteration in order to appeal more to the Western palate. For example, if you went to Japan and asked for cream cheese in your roll, they'd probably just put you on a raft and gently push you out to sea. But to each their own, and today sushi is more popular than ever. So kids, remember to be careful of who you make fun of, because the weird smelly kid of today might just be the next big thing tomorrow.
Hey kids, can I tell you a secret? Come here, closer. Nuclear energy? It's not a bad thing.
Sure, 30 years ago, things like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island were certainly something to worry about. Today, however, it's a different story. Let me tell you kids about thorium. Thorium is uranium's neighbor, just 2 houses down. He's a lot like uranium, just he's a lot more chill. Uranium's the type to do a half-assed job during the day and spend every night doing Jaeger bombs and blasting Kendrick Lamar, you know the type. Thorium, on the other hand, is more career-oriented, and at the end of the day, he's cool with just watching Netflix, eating Ben & Jerry's. Let me walk you through all the steps of nuclear power, and you'll see why thorium is so great. Let's start with mining. So when somebody doesn't feel like getting out of bed, they'll, whine and moan and roll over. Likewise, when uranium doesn't want to get out of bed, he releases deadly cancer-inducing radon gas. This means workers have to put up expensive ventilation systems just to, not die. Thorium's chill. You go to wake him up, he understands he's got a job to do. Goes without a fuss. And even when you do get uranium up, like the lazy bastard he is, he has much less concentration in his ore compared to thorium, so more work has to be done just to get the same amount of material. The Earth's crust also has much more thorium in total than uranium, about 3 times as much. So you got your ore, and you've extracted it. Ready for work, right? Wrong. You see, natural uranium mainly consists of 2 different isotopes, uranium-235 and uranium-238. 238 kinda sucks at life, so uranium has to undergo enrichment to up its concentration of 235. Uranium's kinda like that kid with ADHD, right? You got him in the building, but you still gotta give him his own little room and a couple Ritalin before he starts doing anything productive. That's expensive. Thorium, on the other hand, look at him. He's got his sneakers laced, glasses on, he's ready to go. No enrichment needed. Finally, you're ready to make some power. This part's important, kids, pay attention. So this is where the biggest difference between uranium and thorium comes in. You see, uranium is fissile, whereas thorium is fertile. This means uranium can do his job all by himself, just doing his thing all on his own, whereas thorium's kind of a cripple. He needs a little bit of someone else just to give him the push he needs to start releasing energy. This might sound like a bad thing, but if you think about it, it's a lot safer. If you've got your power production process started, and shit suddenly hits the fan, uranium's just gonna keep going. You can try to move him around, cool him down or whatever, but at the end of the day, this man's gonna be swinging, and it's not gonna be a good day for anyone. Thorium, he's only got 1 leg. Piss him off, he takes a swing at you, just push him over, you're good. Please note, Salmonella Academy does not condone pushing cripples. And that's what thorium reactors do. They allow the barely radioactive liquid thorium to drain away from its helper in the event of an accident, so there's no way for things to escalate. Much safer. But while the process for thorium is better, most of the time people care more about the results. Well, it just so happens thorium is pimpin' in that regard as well. CERN estimates that 1 ton of thorium is capable of producing as much energy as 200 tons of uranium. That's a lot. To compare, that's also equivalent to 3.5 million tons of coal. But let's talk about byproducts. Thorium, being as pure as it is compared even to enriched uranium, produces about 100 times less nuclear waste. So whereas we might not have as many X-Men, that also means much less work has to be done to dispose of the material. Additionally, it's very difficult to make a nuclear weapon out of thorium, since it can't do much on its own. The only thing that's really weaponizable about thorium plants is that little bit of helper material I talked about earlier. But overall, that's a pretty minuscule amount. That means we can feel a lot better about plopping these plants down in places like Iran. So kids, you heard it here first. Thorium is the future. Powerful, clean, reliable, and if things go wrong at the end of the day, you can still kick its ass. Hey kids, let me tell you about Swiss Miss Instant Hot Chocolate, and why their packaging is bullshit. So it comes in a box shaped like this, right? And within the box, there are individual bags of hot chocolate arranged like this. Already you can see some of this company's incompetence shining through. There is no reason for their box to be double wide. It is a waste of cardboard. Let me prove it. Here's a top-down view, right? Let's say this side is 8 inches, this side is 2 inches. That adds up to 20 inches of cardboard. If you doubled it up like this, just had the package a single file, that's only 16 inches. It's a waste. And if that weren't bad enough, for some reason, they decide to attach the bags with these tiny paper bridges. So when you go to make your packet of hot chocolate, you have to detach the 2 bags. That doesn't sound so bad, except for the fact that it's impossible to break them cleanly. Every goddamn time, they tear holes into the sides of the bags. And it's never just one bag either. That would be too simple. It puts holes in both. So either way, you're gonna have to put one back and just live with it leaking powder in the box. It's gotten to the point where I have to employ surgical precision just to avoid getting chocolate dust all over my frickin' house. It would be so simple to avoid too. Even if you really had to have these pointless attachment things, you could at least put little perforations down the center so they break down the middle. School notebooks have been doing it since the 50s, so why, in 2016, has Swiss Miss not discovered the arcane technology of dotted lines? So there's powder everywhere. The cat's looking at you funny because it knows you're pissed off, but at least it's time to enjoy some hot chocolate. You pour your bag into the mug, pour in the hot water, take a sip, and it tastes like piss. Swiss Miss instant piss. So you go back to check the box, thinking maybe you did something wrong. The cat starts shaking because it knows what's coming, and that's when you see it. Serving size, 6 ounces. So finally the dam breaks, you unleash a primal roar of sheer fury. The cat shits itself and jumps out the window as you punt kick the Swiss Miss box across the room. The average mug is 12 fluid ounces in volume. Who in God's name only drinks 6 ounces of liquid? So finally, you reach into the box and pull out the desecrated corpse of that other bag from earlier, and you pour it in. Only then can you enjoy your subpar hot beverage properly. This whole system, right? This charade that Swiss Miss puts you through. It's kinda like telling a guy to just jizz with one ball instead of both of them. They're in the same container, and separating them would be difficult. And even if I were to figure out how to do that, 2 does the job better than 1 anyway, so it's pointless. Nowadays, I just fold the packet in half and rip along the seams of both. And maybe that was their intention, but if so, why would you give me the illusion of separability in the first place? It's like Siamese twins. They're joined for no reason and hard as fuck to separate, so I guess I'm just gonna have to live with both. I don't know which is worse, the fact this minor inconvenience was my biggest dilemma all day, or that this inconvenience even exists in the first place. But anyway, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, do you like fashionable, high-quality apparel at an affordable price? Well, too bad, because that's not what we're talking about today. I'm going to learn you all a thing or two about the real banana republics. Our story begins during the turn of the 20th century in Central and South America. Agriculture's kind of a big deal right now. You've got a ton of little plantations all over the place growing bananas, sugar, pineapples, that kind of thing. And they're doing alright for themselves, no big deal. But then refrigeration happened, and it changed everything. Because now produce could be kept fresh for way longer in transit, meaning the fruit companies could suddenly open up their business to the international market, their biggest new trade partner being the United States. This massive opportunity gave rise to 3 main companies, known as the United Fruit Company, Cuyamel Fruit Company, and the Vaccaro Bros. By growing, shipping, and selling fruit, these 3 firms made just obscene amounts of money, a lot of which went towards buying out smaller family-owned farms and plantations. This allowed them to make even obscener amounts of money, until eventually the only competition that remained was each other. And then shit got real. The year is 1910. One of the companies I mentioned, Cuyamel, was doing most of its business in the country of Honduras, when the president of Honduras, Miguel Davila, decided to give a land grant to the Vaccaro Bros in exchange for helping to build some roadways. In doing so, they basically stole a bunch of Cuyamel's potential plantations and gave them to a competitor. So Samuel Zamuri, owner of Cuyamel, said to himself, "Dang, I hate those guys. If only there was some way for a guy like me to significantly influence the world around him for his own personal gain." Wait a minute. So he used a portion of his McDuck-esque fortune to hire a mercenary army, which he gave to one of his friends, former Honduran President Manuel Bonilla. And together, they overthrew the entire fucking government of Honduras. Yeah. Should've called it Cuyamel, haha. Anyway, Bonilla took power and gave very generous concessions to Cuyamel and United as thanks. But then America saw this, and they were like, "Hey, that's not very freedom of you, young man." To which Zemery replied, "It's okay, we're gonna help this country succeed. After all, politics and business are essentially the same thing." Well, I suppose it's not our place to be policing the governments of other nations, yet. Still though, maybe— Oh, also, nanners. Alright, I'm sold, do what you want. So with their interests secured, the businesses continued to thrive and expand. But since they got cut so many breaks by the government, very little of their commerce actually ended up benefiting Honduras as a whole. In fact, the national debt of Honduras got so bad that the government ended up not being able to perform a lot of its functions. So in response, the 3 fruit companies stepped in and said, "No worries, we got this," and decided to basically build the nation's infrastructure for them, including roads, railways, shipping lines, telegraphs, telephone lines, radio towers. They even switched switch the whole country off to the US dollar. Keep in mind, this wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts, it was mostly just to make their own businesses function more efficiently, but it was helpful either way. Anyway, now, not only did they have total power over their plantations, but also a monopoly over nearly every major industry in the country. Many other Central American nations soon followed this pattern, creating a corrupt sort of symbiosis whereby the fruit companies get huge tax breaks and land grants in exchange for a modernized infrastructure and payoffs to the rich minority. And so, the banana republics were born. Sounds like a pretty sweet gig, right? And it was. For the upper 5% of the populations who happen to hold some direct share in the plantations or shipping lines. For your average Jose, though, life mostly consisted of working on land that wasn't even theirs in exchange for dirt poor wages. So that's how things were for like a decade and a half. At some point, Coyamel was bought out by United, but then Zamore became the owner of the whole thing, somehow, and the Vaccaro company was renamed as Standard Fruit. Then one day, in 1944, the country of Guatemala had a democratic revolution, and the newly elected leader, Juan José Arevalo, wasn't happy with how the companies treated his people. So he implemented several reforms, like a minimum wage law and universal suffrage. And while the populace got a lot of benefit out of this, United Fruit most certainly did not. Because more rights for their workers means less profits for the business as a whole. Then Guatemala got a new president, Jacobo Arbenz, and he continued these reforms. And United continued to get the metaphorical shaft until finally, in 1953, they decided to go to the USA for help. Oh, Eisenhower. Yo, what's up? This Jacobo guy, he's making us pay minimum wages. Well, that doesn't sound very good for business. That's not all, though. He's also taking our unused land and giving it back to the people. Does that sound familiar? Oh dear. You don't think? By the way it's looking, Dwight, I'd say he's a dirty, oh god, collectivizing, no, commie. Commie! Commie! Yeah, go get him, Dwight. Holy shit, you actually did it. World Star! And from that point onward, Guatemala was ruled by a series of US-backed dictatorships, all the way up until 1996. This kind of situation happened in several other places and times as well, almost always driven by some combination of red fear and yellow love. I won't give any more details for the sake of time, but that doesn't mean they weren't big deals. So you might be wondering, where did these companies go? Surely the Clan of Banana shenanigans can't still be around today. Well, that's where you're wrong. They're still in operation, just under different names. Standard Fruit changed their name in 1991 to become none other than Dole Food Company. You know, when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of Super Monkey Ball, and I used to wonder, what kind of cruel tyrant would just stick an ape in a ball for their own amusement? Well, now I know. Those bastards. As for United, one day in 1976, their CEO decided he couldn't take the heat anymore, so he jumped out the fucking window. That's a real thing, look it up. Then some other guy bought the company and renamed it to, drumroll please, Chiquita Banana. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The face you once knew as an innocent, fun-loving dancer/fruit merchant is actually a ruthless tyrant who overthrows democracies and undermines basic human rights for her own profit. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, let's talk about babies for a second. Now I think we can all agree, generally, babies suck at most things, either literally or figuratively. They have almost no life skills whatsoever. However, as it turns out, babies do actually have some traits that make them superior to adults in certain isolated aspects. In this video, I'm going to tell you guys about a few. First is the baby's non-drowning reflex. If babies under the age of 6 months are put underwater, they'll instinctively hold their breath. Additionally, their heartbeat begins to slow down as soon as they're submerged, which allows them to use much less oxygen and, as a result, stay alive much longer than the average person. As we all know, babies get themselves into bad situations all the time. Soon as your back is turned, they're off trying to lick another socket or whatever. So this reflex probably evolved from back in the day, right? Mom's off picking berries, baby wanders off, ends up in the middle of a lake, and somehow this whole reflex thing gives the village more time to, go get a raft and fish them out. Next is a baby's grip. They're able to support their entire body weight with just one hand, which is more than a lot of adults can do. Of course, it's kind of cheating because they only weigh as much as a baby, but it's still kind of impressive. This trait is shared by apes, whose babies instinctively cling on to the backs of their mothers. So that way, if she gets a little courageous swinging from branch to branch, the baby doesn't just go flying. Anyway, because of this, it's speculated that babies actually got their firm grasp from our ape ancestors millions of years ago. And it's only a bit later in life when your genetics go, go, oh yeah, leg's neat, and ditch the whole grabby thing. Next, babies are also very seductive. Not in the sense of like strutting around in thigh highs, making dudes' eyes bulge. Not that seductive, but just in the sense of, hey, I like looking at this thing. We should keep it alive for a while. Here's an example. If people saw a 5-year-old on the streets rolling around in a pile of its own shit, they'd be like, ugh, what a scumbag. But if an infant did it, people would still be like, oh man, little guy, I want to take you home, clean you up, put you in little hats. Yeah, it has to do with a baby's facial features, like their large forehead and eyes, which set off a bunch of baby caring instincts in our brains, causing us to perceive cuteness. It's only when they hit like 2 or 3 when that all goes down the shitter. Lastly, babies have a surprisingly good concept of morality. According to a study by Yale University's Infant Cognition Center, babies are born with an innate sense of right and wrong. Here's how the study went, right? So first they put on a puppet show for the baby with these 2 rabbit dolls, and they made one of them act nice and the other one act like a dick. Then at the end of the show, the babies were offered either puppet, and in almost every case, the babies took the nice one. And you might say a strong grip on morality doesn't qualify as a superpower. Personally, I disagree. People are terrible at keeping their basic sense of right and wrong unless their society maintains it for them. Let me give an example. A few days ago in the Philippines, the president of the entire country basically said, hey, we should just start murdering every drug addict alive. Right now. And this isn't seen as insane over there. No, millions of Filipinos are now on board with this. It is fucked. You see, babies lack the mental capacity to justify atrocities with shit like it's about the greater good, you know. They have no prejudice. They just see people as people. And honestly, I think we could all learn a thing or two from that. Not to get all George Carlin-y on you guys or anything. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey adults. So most of us are aware of at least one animal companion to the Commander-in-Chief. All but 3 presidents have owned some kind of pet during their term, and there's good reason for that. Not only does a lovable mutt serve to humanize an otherwise larger-than-life figure, but their cute antics can also be a great distraction when needed. Huh? Drone strikes. Never heard of her. Hey, we're doing a photo op with this dog that shares a name with my vice president's son, cause you know, that's not weird at all. But as it turns out, dogs and cats are just the tip of the iceberg. There have been a lot of quadrupedal occupants of the White House, even without Miss Lewinsky. So today we'll be going through just a few of the more interesting ones. Going back to the beginning, Washington had critters galore, including 4 black and tan slur hounds that he named Drunkard, Taster, Tippler, and Tipsy. They sound like if Santa's reindeer were all alcoholics, which would be a shame because Rudolph's red nose would no longer be of note. John Adams had 3 dogs that presumably spanned the alignment chart, being named Juno, Mark, and Satan respectively. Not a joke. Jefferson kept around 40 sheep during his presidency, one of which was a 4-horned Shetland ram. Though nameless, said ram soon became famous for killing a young boy on White House grounds. Rather than immediately destroying the animal as we'd expect today, Jefferson just had it moved back to Monticello. It was eventually put down, but only after it single-handedly killed several other rams at the estate, which just goes to show how Jefferson operated. Random child, not the best optics, but that can be forgiven. But my own property, that's a bridge too far, Rambo. John Quincy Adams' wife Louisa practiced sericulture, which is a fun word for silkworm keeping. As a side note, sericulture's been going on since at least 3630 BC, which is kinda nutty, cause that means we domesticated worms to turn their goo into clothes before we figured out how to ride a horse. Jackson had an African gray parrot named Poll, short for Polly, that would apparently curse like a sailor, probably thanks to the teachings of Old Hickory himself. Having outlived its owner, Poll ended up being removed from Jackson's funeral service after unleashing so much profanity that guests found it genuinely upsetting. He also kept roosters for cockfighting, which was acceptable at the time and still far from the worst thing he's done morally. During Van Buren's term, the Sultan of Oman sent a variety of gifts to the president, among them being a pair of tiger cubs. He was like, this is badass, and desperately wanted to keep them in the White House. But the dickheads in Congress asserted that, due to a specific constitutional provision, gifts to the presidential office weren't for the man himself, but for the people. Van Buren said, fuck the people, them's my tigers, and got into a legal battle with the legislator over the issue, which he eventually lost. The tigers were subsequently sent to a zoo, and over 20 years later, Van Buren died of pneumonia, completely unrelated to this incident. Although Andrew Johnson had no de jure pets, he did befriend a family of mice he found in his bedroom, feeding them flour and grain and referring to them as the little fellows. It's an oddly wholesome thing to hear from someone who essentially set the trajectory for the next 100 years of black disenfranchisement. Mr. Johnson, we still have a country to rebuild. Get out of my room, I'm getting rat-pilled! Taft had 2 cows during his term. The first of them was named Mooly Wooly, and she died a year and a half in after, quote, eating too many oats. Mooly was promptly replaced by the far more dignified Pauline Wayne. She was a real dime of a heifer, which led Taft to show
show her off at the International Dairymen's Expo in Milwaukee. In order to get her there, she was transported in a private car attached to a train headed for the stockyards in Chicago. But a switch crew mixed up which car was hers, leading to 2 days of frantic telegraphs asking where the president's cow had gone. She only narrowly avoided the slaughterhouse when a couple of attendants at the stockyard recognized Pauline for what she was, and all was well. This next one requires a little background info. So the traditional Thanksgiving dinner was and remains a significant yearly ceremony for the first family. For half a century, from 1873 to 1913, the duty of providing the presidential turkey belonged to one Horace Vose, a private turkey farmer based in Rhode Island. After his death, though, things turned into a free-for-all, with numerous farmers sending unsolicited turkeys, both alive and dead, in an attempt to secure a position as the next annual caterer for the White House. Nobody was decided on for a decade, and upon assuming office in 1923, Calvin Coolidge found the volume of birds showing up at his doorstep alarming, and put an end to the tradition that year, instead opting to buy his own turkey. But in 1925, after much outside pressure, he caved, and was immediately flooded with not only turkey, but a variety of increasingly exotic animals to eat. Among them was a live raccoon he received the following year. Coolidge was, at the time, blissfully unaware of the intricate dance performed on the palate between forward yet ephemeral gaminess and heady seductive musk when one submits himself to the experience of a toothsome raccoon fillet, and as such he decided to keep it as a pet instead. Dubbed Rebecca, the creature soon came to be a core member of the Coolidge family. She ate as well as any of them, being fed things like shrimp and persimmons, and she was particularly fond of eggs. Given free reign over the house, Rebecca's hobbies reportedly included unscrewing light bulbs, uprooting houseplants, and playing with wet bars of soap in the bathtub. She was so beloved that she even had her own treehouse built for her in the White House yard. When the Coolidges made way for the Hoovers, Rebecca was forced to vacate her post, but the new first family soon found that they had a squatter on their hands. The new tenant of Rebecca's treehouse was a wild opossum who, rather than being evicted, was adopted by the Hoovers in a similar fashion to Rebecca, albeit from a farther distance, mostly just saying, yeah, that's ours now. He was given the name Billy Possum, which is a reference to our old friend Taft. See, as the man following Teddy Roosevelt in the White House, Taft had some big shoes to fill. So during his term, some enterprising young dumbasses approached Taft with what they claimed would be the sequel to the teddy bear. They called it Billy Possum, which is itself a reference to the president's fondness of possum and taters, a dish he famously requested at a banquet in Atlanta as an act of goodwill towards the South and its culture. Taft found the idea amusing enough that he gave the green light, and many thousands of Billy Possums were produced. Given their total obscurity today, it's clear these toys were a massive flop, and there's a few reasons for that. For one, trying to force fads at all is like trying to push water uphill, but also, the story of Roosevelt refusing to shoot a tied-up bear has a bit more symbolic poetry to it than, it's a possum cause he like possum, he a fat boy, eat him up good. Couple that with the constant character assassination that the opossum as an animal has received from ignorant urbanites, and it becomes obvious that this thing was doomed from the start. But anyway, that's where the Hoover opossum got his name, and his exploits were pretty limited outside of temporarily filling in as a mascot of a local high school. In 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gifted a dog to the Kennedys, named Pushinka, or Fluffy. And while it is normally rude to look a gift dog in the mouth, an exception can be made when the single biggest threat to the free world insists that said dog should live with the president. Pushinka was x-rayed, put through metal detectors, and given ultrasounds out of fear that someone implanted her with a listening device. Fortunately, though there may be bugs in some of you mugs, there ain't no bugs in she, and Pushinka remained a Kennedy for the rest of her days. While truthfully, the gift was likely given as a simple act of good faith designed to reduce Cold War tensions, Pushinka was also the daughter of Strelka, who, during Sputnik 5, became the first mammal to make it back from space alive. So I'd like to think of it as more of a passive-aggressive space race flex. Like, yeah, our astronanimals are so alive, they're making babies even. Hope looking at this one constantly reminds you of where you stand. With that, I hope you found this highlight reel enlightening. It feels good to know that while Congress has always been a zoo, so too has the White House at times. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and you make my girlhood tremble.
Hey kids, today I'll be teaching you how to read these things. The symbol is technically known as NFPA 704, but nobody really calls it that. Most people refer to it as a fire diamond, or a safety square, or if you're British, a figmenty pigmenty crossa tossa, whatever floats your boat. Anyway, when you see the symbol, usually on a door or a container or something, it means there's a hazardous material present, and the numbers and symbols on the diamond give information on exactly how dangerous that material is. So first off, notice the 4 colors, right? Each one represents a different type of hazard. Red is for flammability because fire and burning things are usually red. Yellow is for chemical reactivity, I guess because chemical reactions and involves swapping electrons, and electricity is yellow, sure. Blue is for health hazards because fuck you. And then white is just extra space for other stuff. So the 3 colored diamonds, or if you want to be politically correct, the African American diamonds, each have a number from 0 to 4. And each of these is like a threat level for that category. If the number is 0, it basically means you'd have to be some kind of professional to manage to fuck things up in that fashion. Sand, for example, has a 0 in its flammability. The only time sand burns is when it's wedged in the cracks of your Speedo for too long. However, please note that the health section does not apply to ingestion. For example, motor oil has a blue rating of 0, but that in no way makes it safe to drink. If the number is 1, that means there's a threat present, but you'd still have to be like an advanced level dumbass in order to really find it. Cellulose, the primary chemical found in paper, has a flammability of 1, so don't, hold it over a fire for a while, and you'll be fine. 2 is where things start being kind of a big deal. Capsaicin, the chemical that makes pepper spicy, has a health risk of 2. You finish chopping your jalapenos, and then you go touching your jalapenis. It's not gonna kill you or nothing, but it's gonna mess your day up for sure. If you see a 3, that's when you know you gotta watch out. Gasoline, it's got a flammability of 3, and we all know gasoline. You see gasoline walking by, you better take the cigarette out of your mouth, get the static off your clothes, fix your hair, make yourself presentable, don't make eye contact. That's the only way to keep yourself safe. And then 4 is the highest number on the scale. If you see a 4, the best thing to do is just start walking backwards, because if you're close enough to read that 4, chances are you're not where you need to be. Nitroglycerin has a reactivity of 4. If you soak a tissue in nitroglycerin and give it to your friend to sneeze in, that sneeze will result in his entire goddamn face getting blown off. So yeah, 4s are nothing to sneeze at. Literally. Now let's move on to the bottom bit. Unlike me, this diamond isn't just a big white waste of space. This is the spot for any extra warnings you need to know about. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory, like radiation, or biohazard, or gaze, so I'll just go through a few that aren't as easy to interpret. Take a look at this one. Unless you hear faint mooing while you're reading it, chances are it doesn't mean what you think. OX is short for oxidizer, which is basically something that produces oxygen when exposed to heat. This doesn't sound so bad until you realize that heat plus oxygen rarely ends well for most fuels in the vicinity. If you see this one, it means white people aren't allowed to touch the material. Just kidding. White people are allowed to do whatever they want. It actually means don't mix with water, or else it could explode or multiply or something. Ese means simple asphyxiant, referring to gases like helium. It basically means that while this gas isn't poisonous, it's also, not air. So if you breathe it for too long, you will still die. Alright kids, so now that you know all the ins and outs of these things, let me give you a little quiz. On the left we got a bunch of things, and on the right we have a bunch of fire diamonds. Pause the video now and see if you can match them up correctly. All done? Here are the answers. So now you know all about NFPA 704. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, I've been told by a lot of people that there's nothing more exciting than the metric system. They may have a point, but I can still prove them wrong. Today, we're going to talk about some specific lesser-known units of measurement. First is the Schmidt Pain Index. Now, anybody could tell you that getting stung by a bug tends to hurt, but just how much does one sting hurt compared to another? Are yellow jackets worse than hornets? Are fire ants worse than honeybees? Nobody in the world of science knew for sure. That is, until a young upstart by the name of Justin Schmidt decided to boldly go where no entomologist has gone before. But how did he plan to quantify the level of pain caused by different insect stings? Well, it went something like this. Alright, honeybee. Zzz, ow, god, that hurt. I'll give that like a 2. Next, paper wasp. Zzz, okay, that's like a 3. Next, let's try bullet ant. Jesus Christ, Mary Mother of Satan's left nipple, it's like my hand is made entirely out of urethras, and each and every one is having a red-hot catheter put in and ripped out 5 times every second. My very being is on fire. My only desire left is for death himself to bless me with sweet relief. I'll give that a 4. No. 4+. In all seriousness though, I'm pretty sure the index is meant to be logarithmic, like earthquake magnitudes. So just like a magnitude 7 earthquake is 10 times as powerful as a magnitude 6, a bullet ant sting causes 100 times as much pain as a honeybee. In total, Schmidt catalogs 78 different species of the order Hymenoptera, which includes ants, bees, and wasps. You can tell a man is really dedicated to his job when, after getting stung by 77 insects, he says to himself, you know what? That wasn't enough. I need one more creature to inject its venom into me, and only then will this list be complete. I guess you could say he just really gave a Schmidt. Next is the Waffle House Index. So for those of you that didn't know, the Waffle House is one of the most resilient establishments in the world. Whereas most restaurants would simply close down in the event of, say, a hurricane, Waffle House just goes from their normal mode to disaster response mode, following extensive protocol that allows that location to keep serving customers in spite of low food supply or even a power outage. In response to this business practice, FEMA came up with what is known as the Waffle House Index, which is a system to easily assess how badly an area is damaged by a natural catastrophe. If the Waffle House is fully open, they're in the green, which means things are basically fine. If the Waffle House is using their low supply menu, you're in the yellow, which means that the area is almost certainly mid-disaster. Finally, if you're in the red, that means the Waffle House is either closed or gone. Now that's a sign of some real nuclear zombie holocaust type shit going down, so if you're not already dead, you should probably vacate the area. Most engineers could tell you that, structurally speaking, the triangle is the strongest of all shapes. But I believe that there's one shape that's even stronger. Godspeed, Waffle House. Next we have the APGAR score. So the APGAR score is a rating system used by hospitals to determine how healthy a newborn baby is on a scale from 0 to 10. It's called APGAR based on its 5 criteria, which include appearance, pulse, grimace, activity, and respiration. And each of these is rated on a scale from 0 to 2 to get your final score. Personally, I think this set of standards is a little flawed. Here's an example. Well, it's completely blue, and it doesn't really want to move at all, but it's got a really fast heartbeat and it's screaming really loudly. I'd give this baby like a 6 out of 10. That's good enough. So in response, I've invented my own rating system. It's called the RAGU score. R is for reflexes. It's common knowledge that if you hold any healthy baby by its feet and then drop it, it'll always land upright. If your baby can't do that, that's a sure sign that it's defective. A is for abnormality. If your baby seems weird, that's typically a good indicator that it's weird. G still stands for grimace, just like in the APGAR test, only instead of looking at the baby's facial expression, you just bring grimace from McDonald's into the room and see how the baby reacts. If it starts crying, that's a good sign because grimace is absolutely fucking terrifying. And finally, U is for ugliness, just because that might sway your decision on whether or not you want to keep it. Now, if the baby passes the test, it gets to go home, but if it fails, then it gets shipped off to the factory and made into ragu, hence the name of the test. Some people might be upset by this fact, but you know what they say, pray go today, ragu tomorrow. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about the bombardier beetle. So here's what he looks like, right? Already you can tell he's kind of a prick. He just looks like an ant that one day decided to stick a sunflower seed on his back, thinking he's all creative, like, yeah, I'm original now. I'm my own insect. Got the junk in the trunk for the ladies, no big deal. That's just the picture Wikipedia shows, though. There are a bunch of other species of bombardier, most of which look a little more unique, so I'll give him some credit. The cool thing about the bombardier beetle, though, has nothing to do with appearance. It's actually the fact that this creature has some pretty awesome weaponry up its sleeve. The beetle is actually capable of shooting a foul-smelling chemical spray from its back end. And it doesn't even have to eat Chipotle beforehand. Am I right, ladies? Anyway, the spray contains, among other things, a compound called 1,4-benzoquinone, which is quite irritating to vulnerable tissue, like eyes or mouths. Couple that with the fact that the mixture comes out at a temperature close to the boiling point, and you've got a pretty gangster arthropod on your hands. One could liken the bombardier beetle to the common Tumblr feminist. Whenever it feels even slightly threatened, it starts pulling shit out of its ass in an effort to be as unnecessarily inflammatory as possible. Even more interesting than the spray itself, though, is the way the beetle pulls it off. It starts out with 2 different substances, hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone, each of which is stored in a separate reservoir in the body. Then whenever the bombardier gets his jerrys in a jostle, he releases either chemical into a single chamber. Once they mix, these chemicals react violently with one another, producing a bunch of heat and gas. The pressure from the gas is what propels the liquid out of the chamber and into the face of anything nearby. Fortunately for the bombardier, the pressure also seals off the entrances to the reservoirs, so as to stop the thing from, blowing itself up. As soon as the pressure's released, though, the valves reopen and the process can be repeated. And this whole cycle takes place within the course of a couple milliseconds, meaning the average beetle could fire anywhere from 5 to 20 blasts within a fraction of a second. Once this video is over, you guys should look up some slow-mo videos of the bombardier in action. I can't show you here because of copyright and all, but it's pretty cool, so go check it out. Anyway, though, this system of using using pressurized gases both to launch projectiles and to regulate the chambering process is actually somewhat similar to how guns like the AK-47 work, so I thought it was pretty neat how this creature managed to evolve something so mechanical in nature. I just hope the NRA doesn't catch wind of these guys. If the government takes away our chemical weapons, only the bombardier beetles will have chemical weapons. Then what, man? Then what? Hey, do you guys remember how the Flintstones always used to use animals as tools? Like that pelican cement mixer, you know, it's all living. Well, it's a shame the writers didn't know about the bombardier beetle, because it would fit right in with their primitive shenanigans. Wilma's walking home late at night, right? Hear someone sneaking up on her, hand on her shoulder, bam! Prehistoric pepper spray. Then when he's down, she whips out the eel, bam! Prehistoric taser. He thinks it's over, little does he know, she's got a cicada on a string around her neck. Bam! Prehistoric rape whistle. Police come, take him to jail, he serves his sentence, after a while he gets granted parole, things finally looking up for him, and that's when they stick the parrot on his shoulder. Bam! Prehistoric Megan's Law. Hey, so I'm kinda new around here, and so legally I'm obligated.
He's a pervert.
Well, what he means to say is
Kitty diddler.
what? Okay, first of all, nobody got diddled, let alone
Once a rapist, always a rapist.
Anyway, what was this episode about? Right. Bombardier beetle. So, yeah, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Kids, let's talk about Fidel Castro. We're all familiar with Castro, right? Dictator of Cuba for the whole second half of the 20th century, main antagonist of the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know. Anyway, this man loves three things. He loves Cuba, he loves communism, and good God, does the man love dairy. Yep, you heard me right. The all-powerful dictator of communist Cuba is obsessed with anything related to milk and its derivatives. I drew up a little chart here, right? I call it the Leche Lovin' Ladder. At the bottom you got dairy farmers, then you got Ross O'Donovan, then Mr. Bones, then starving babies, and then all the way up at the top here, you got Fidel Castro. Today, I'm going to share a few true stories that illustrate his preoccupation. Okay, the first one isn't really a story so much as a fact, but according to several sources, Castro was known to be able to eat 18 scoops of ice cream after a meal. That's more than 2 pints. If that doesn't impress you, then go try it for yourself. Me, I can barely manage a pint and a half on an empty stomach, and Castro's doing it on top of a full meal. But it gets better. Being such an ice cream connoisseur, Castro ordered the construction of an ice cream shop. But this isn't your average everyday parlor, not by a long shot. He built a straight up ice cream complex taking up an entire city block. This was a piece of modern architecture too, in total contrast to the surrounding slums, all for the sake of ice cream. The place is called Coppelia, and it's still open today. Of course, Castro's obsession went beyond just personal pleasure. Dairy was so dear to him that it often found its way into diplomatic interactions. Like one time, a French diplomat came to visit, so Castro whips out some Cuban cheese. Specifically though, it was Camembert cheese, a variety that France is famous for. French guy was like, hey, not bad, it's almost as good as the French kind. Try it again, I think you'll find it's even better than the French. Alright, I wouldn't say that. I'm sorry, are you disrespecting my cheese? In my house? On my island? No, I mean it's good, I just said the French kind is better. Maybe if you froggy fucks bathed once in a while, you'd be able to taste the cheese instead of your own B.O. Listen, you've got your cigars, we've got our cheese, live with it. Fine. Fuck him, it's good cheese. I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but that's basically how it went down. So already it's obvious that dairy is of great value to Castro. Most exceptional, however, is how this value reflected in his leadership. Naturally, having an entire nation at his disposal, Castro wanted to bolster the Cuban dairy industry as much as possible. But there was one problem. Cuba initially had two types of cows called La Reinas and Zebus. La Reinas came from the days when Spain ruled Cuba, and Zebus originated from India. Both of these cows are well suited to the Cuban environment, having a very high tolerance for heat. However, they don't produce much milk, they're mostly just raised for their meat. So Castro decides to import thousands of Holsteins from Canada. Holsteins are the classic black and white cows, and as we all know, you can juice these guys for days. They are utterly superior. Only problem is, they're used to living in Canada, so when they're plopped down under the scorching Caribbean sun, it's going to stress them out. They're not going to be laughing cows by any means. So as a result, Castro's imports still didn't put out enough milk to satisfy his desires. At this point, your average run-of-the-mill dairy queen would have given up. But Castro, he's more than that. He's a dairy dictator. So he ordered the construction of a giant air-conditioned complex with the sole purpose of providing a comfortable environment for his Holsteins. And it helped a little bit, but they were still stressed out. They still weren't putting out at their natural levels. And as you can imagine, climate controlling an entire facility is very expensive, so Castro was forced to abandon the project. But like the astronaut he is, Castro held on to his dream of finding the Milky Way. away. So he gathered a team of scientists and farmers and ordered them to breed together the Zebus and the Holsteins in order to produce a heat-resistant, lactose-pumping super cow. The breeding efforts were mostly a bust, never producing the bovine master race that Castro longed for. However, there was one exception. Under Castro's program, a single individual was born that met his expectations with flying colors. The cow was named Ubre Blanca, Spanish for white udder, and she produced world record-breaking volumes of milk, peaking at 110 liters a day. That's more than 29 entire gallons of lactation. Needless to say, Castro was absolutely euphoric at this isolated success of his. To say he went ballistic would be an understatement. He went intercontinentally ballistic. Like, India hasn't got shit on the levels of cow worship that Castro performed. Daily updates were published in the Cuban national newspaper describing Ubre Blanca's health and productivity, and when she died in 1985, Castro commissioned a giant marble statue of the cow in her honor. He also had scientists harvest tissue and egg samples for the sake of preserving her DNA. After Ubre Blanca's death, Castro's plans for the Cuban dairy industry got even more desperate and ridiculous somehow. This is based off of an actual conversation that he had with his team of scientists in 1987. Okay guys, hear me out. What if we make cows that are the size of dogs, so that way they can live in people's apartments with them? Fidel, I don't think that's gonna work. No, it'll work. You just have to grow grass in the apartment too. You can't be serious. Yeah, you just gotta put up some fluorescent lights. Bam, little grazing patch for your doggy cow. You are a fucking lunatic. And obviously nothing ever came of that idea, and Cuba's dairy industry is still floundering today, sadly. So yeah, if you haven't gotten the picture by now, the dude likes milk. Imagine he's at the birth of his grandson, right? Ah, what a beautiful baby boy. Fidel, there's something we need to tell you. Your grandson, he's lactose intolerant. Prepare the firing squad. Anyway, there's plenty of other miscellaneous stories surrounding his little preoccupation, like the time the CIA tried to poison his milkshake, so I just decided to highlight a few big ones. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, it's That Happened Thursday, so it's time to learn some history. Today's lesson is on the weirdest 16th century Danish astronomist that you'll ever meet. Okay, that isn't saying much, but trust me, he's an interesting guy. Meet Tycho Brahe, or Brahe, or Broham, I don't really know, let me look it up. Alright, apparently I was right the first time, it's Tycho Brahe. Already you can see that something ain't quite right. He looks like Jamie Heinemann's gay cousin. So his claim to fame, among other things, is that he spent around 30 years collecting astronomical data with nothing but the naked eye, data that was later utilized by minds like Newton. However, if you think he just sat around staring at the sky all day like some kind of loser, then you're way off base. First off, besides the whole astronomer thing, Tycho was an immensely prominent noble for a long period of his life. It was to the point where he owned 1% of the entire wealth of Denmark at one point in the 1580s. Today, people like Bernie always talk about the 1%! Bitch, I am the 1%. Oh dear, I am somehow even more bold. Honestly, imagine a single scientist having that much money today. If you gave that kind of cash to Stephen Hawking, he would probably turn into Skynet. Beyond being a stargazing fat cat, though, Tycho is also just a straight-up lunatic. Here's a story. So he got into a little scrap in his college years, right? That ended up in a sword duel where he lost part of the tip of his nose. You'd think he would have learned his lesson. But later on in his life, he somehow got himself into another sword duel, this time in the dark, and he lost the rest of his nose. Maybe that's where all the money came from, honestly. Just put out a bunch of nose insurance beforehand. Oh, it's already broken, I don't need the rest. Get myself into another fight. So finally he got himself fitted with a new brass prosthetic nose, which he wore for the rest of his life. But that's just the tip of the crazy iceberg. Tycho, being fabulously well endowed, financially, get your mind out the gutter, one day decided to hire a dwarf for his court. Just to, do dwarf things, I guess. The guy's name was Jep, and Tycho was in full belief that he could also tell the future. Hold on, I'm getting a vision. I see you giving more money to a little person. Oh wow, must have been happening. Ha ha, silly Jep. Damn. Seriously though, imagine one of today's astronomers pulling something like this. So, Mr. deGrasse Tyson, what discoveries have you made today? I've discovered something about myself, Steve. Go on. I want to own a dwarf. I want to call him Jeb and have him do dances for me and, like, be my footstool if I asked him nicely. What the fuck, Neil? Also, he should be psychic. What truly takes the cake, though, is Tico's pet elk. Yep, this walrus owned a caribou. Can't make that shit up. So one day, the next noble over wanted to borrow the elk to entertain guests at a party, right? So Tico sends the beast over to the other guy's manor. At the party, the elk gets pissed drunk, climbs up a staircase, falls down it, and dies. And dies. Knowing Tico, he was probably just like, well, no more moose, I'll buy another one, life goes on. So that's the story of Tico Brah. Remember, kids, eccentricity can get you far in life, but dwarf owning can get you even farther.
Hey kids, remember the plague, malaria, smallpox? Kinda bad, right? Well, guess what? They're peanuts compared to the level of destruction that's been wreaked over the years across the kingdom next door. Today, I'm gonna talk about some of the most interesting diseases to ever strike the world of plants. The most famous one is probably the potato blight. It's a fungus that attacks potatoes. This is what it looks like. On the left, we have a healthy potato, while on the right, we have a blighty one. Notice how this one is noble and robust, like a lion's heart, while the other is shriveled and black, like Betsy DeVos's uterus. You could try to eat it, but it's basically like rotting cork. You wouldn't get very far. So in 1845, Ireland relied a lot on potatoes, right? That's because their soil was dumb, and that's the most nutritious thing they could grow. Then the blight came, and all their food turned to poo. 1 million starved, 2 million left. They came to America. They brought freckles, and these things. Hoity-toity-toy, now we have the Celtics. Next is the chestnut blight, which infects, you guessed it, the elderly. Wait, no, that's shingles. Chestnut blight infects American chestnut trees, which once populated a huge portion of the South and Mid-Atlantic regions of the country. Key word, once. During the early 20th century, the blight arrived, which ended up killing around 4 billion trees over the course of a couple decades. Hey, remember that time 4 billion giant things died inexplicably? Me neither. Nobody does. Let me give some perspective on the situation. Those trees were huge, like 40 meters tall apiece. That means 160 million kilometers of tree was destroyed by this disease. That's long enough to get from the Earth to the Sun with 10 million kilometers to spare. Here's another. If we take the volume of all these trees, we get 126 billion cubic meters. If we burn that much wood, we get 861 quadrillion joules of energy. That's the amount released by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, times 10,000. So yeah, kind of a big deal. But who cares, right? Why worry about 4 billion dumb smelly old trees when there's 1,000 whole pandas that need our help? Isn't that right, WWF? You populist scum. Anyway, moving on. This next one is called, get ready, broom rape. I'm serious. Broom rape. Broom rape. Wikipedia, broom rape. Naked broom rape. Imagine if we gave human illnesses names like that. I'm sorry, Sam, but you have urethra cactus. I would just end it right there. Doesn't even matter what the actual symptoms are. Anyway, broom rape is considered a parasitic plant. This is what it does. The seeds of the broom rape will hang out in the soil for years until the roots of a host plant come along. When they do, the broom rape bursts out of its shell and immediately starts leeching off the other organism. Eventually, once they grow enough, they'll breach the surface with these little flowers. Notice, no leaves, no green. Who needs chlorophyll when you're a filthy freeloader, right? These flowers get fertilized and the whole thing starts over. Just one of these guys isn't a big deal to the host. But once you get enough, they have the potential to suck an entire farm dry, causing sweeping crop failure. Pun definitely intended. Next is this one. There's a few different ways you can pronounce it depending on your social standing, ranging from ergot to elgo. Being the disheveled pauper I am, I prefer ergot. Rolls off the tongue, you know. Ergot is a fungus that mainly infects grains like wheat, barley, and especially rye. And it's capable of producing a whole soup of compounds called alkaloids, which can have a variety of effects on the human body. Most of them not fun, mostly spasms and diarrhea, that kind of thing. However, one particular alkaloid called ergotamine structurally resembles LSD and has a similar function when it enters the body. So a medieval peasant would be sitting there, eating a nice loaf of rye bread, just minding his own business. Then all of a sudden, holy shit, I'm blasting out of both ends! My heart's a seizing, my lungs a wheezing, the fucking walls are melting, I can hear Satan's voice, he's telling me to invest in Apple. What does that mean? Why does he want me to buy apples? This would go on for like a day. Sometimes their fingers and toes would fall off, but then they'd be alright. Unless they weren't. Moral of the story, kids, don't eat strange bread. You could trip balls and die. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, Today, I'm going to talk about the different kinds of straws. So first you got straw. This was the first kind of straw to be used by humans. Many of this straw is still called straw because it was discovered before plural nouns were invented. Good for roofing, good for feeding livestock, and it can also be used to make straw men, which are good for holding back society. Straw rating, 6 out of 10. Then there's classic straws, a beverage conduit incredibly simple in form, yet highly effective in function. In fact, these devices have caused me to create a new philosophical principle. I call it Onella's straw. It's totally identical in every way to Occam's razor, except for the fact that it only applies to straws. Anyway, straw rating, 10 out of 10. Next on the food chain are bendy straws. These are proof that just bending something a little can make it that much better. Bend a breadstick, you got a pretzel. Bend a sword, you got a scimitar. Bend the rules, you got a badass. Bend the truth, you got a nomination. Bend a straw, and you've got, a slightly more convenient straw. Straw rating, bendy 10 out of 10. Next is the last straw. I don't really know what it looks like. All I know is that it makes girls never talk to me again. Straw rating, cry wank out of 10. Then you got crazy straws. In the words of Dr. Ian Malcolm, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, that they didn't stop to think if they should. This quote is frequently misattributed to having been talking about bringing dinosaurs back to life, when in reality he was talking about the invention of the crazy straw. The crazy straw is a perfect example of humanity's tendency to overdo things just to get our sick kicks. When my gaze falls upon a small child across the room at Olive Garden, gently sipping chocolate milk through a crazy straw, all I see is a misguided youth wasting his life. Straw rating, 9 out of 10. So after all this, I figured, hey, if we already got the crazy straw, we might as well double down here. So I invented something that goes beyond just crazy. I call it the menace to society straw. Patent pending. Straw rating, fuck you, God is dead. Out of 10. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, it's Food Friday. So today, I'm going to cover some of the deadly toxins found in your local produce section. Our first item is rhubarb. Now, the part of the rhubarb that you normally eat, the delicious red stalk, is virtually toxin-free, so no worries there. It's the greenery of the plant that's a cause for concern. The leaves of the rhubarb plant contain small amounts of oxalic acid, which is toxic to humans. And it's not a fun poison either, not one of those drift off to dreamland types. It will mess your day up, particularly in the digestive and renal areas. Some symptoms include breathing difficulty, burning of the mouth and throat, eye pain, bloody urine, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, convulsions, coma, and only then will you finally receive the sweet release of death. Of course, you'd need like a shitload of leaves to actually reach the lethality point, about 11 pounds for a 150-pound person. To put that into perspective, the average person eats around 4 pounds of food a day total, so to eat that weight of anything would be very difficult. Next up are almonds. So you know how they say cyanide reeks of almonds? Turns out it's actually the other way around. Sweet almonds, the type people normally eat, contain a bit of the toxin, just enough to get a whiff. After eating about a pound of them, you may experience some of the more mild symptoms which, while they're not exactly fun, aren't quite as bad as oxalic acid. In order for the poison to actually be deadly, you would have to eat around 4 pounds of almonds in the course of a couple hours. Considering that's the total food intake daily for an average person, and that you would be vomiting, cramping, and hyperventilating the whole time, it'd be hard to pull off. Next are apple seeds. Most of you are probably familiar with this one. Apple seeds contain cyanogenic glycosides, which are materials that produce cyanide once they enter the digestive system. These chemicals also have a significant presence in a whole menagerie of other produce items, but out of all of these, apple seeds will give you the most bang for your buck as far as potency goes. You would only need around 3.5 ounces of the seeds to do yourself in, which is a lot easier to pull off than the last two. Of course, the whole point of seeds in fruit is so that things will eat them and crap them out elsewhere to spread the plant around, which would be pretty hard to do if the thing carrying your babies keels over and dies. For this reason, the glycosides are only accessible when one crushes the seeds open. Whole seeds are relatively safe. But if you really wanted to off yourself, you could toss 18 apple cores in a blender and drink the whole thing. The most virulent thing you'll find in your entire produce section, however, is none other than the kidney bean. Yes, this innocent-looking legume holds some sinister secrets. Kidney beans contain a toxin known as phytohemagglutinin, and as little as 4 raw beans worth is enough to trigger symptoms. The main sign of kidney bean poisoning is known scientifically as two-tip tummy terrorism. Boiling the beans deactivates the toxin, which is why we can eat them normally, but heating the beans below the boiling point, as in a slow cooker, actually increases the toxin's potency, to the point where a single heated bean is enough to get you blasting out of both ends. I couldn't actually find any reports on deaths caused by the toxin, probably because everyone who ingests it ends up propelling it away from them at high velocities a few hours later. But it'll certainly make you want to die at least. There are a bunch of other minor sources of poison present in your produce section, of course. I just decided to highlight a few. Anyway, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, do you ever feel like life has passed you by? Does the daily grind leave you feeling trapped in your own life like an animal in a cage? Well, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy some fun facts about livestock while you're at it. Today, I'll be giving a tour of the life, death, and processing of the American beef cattle. Disclaimer, this video is only a basic summary of some common industry practices. No two farms are alike, some are nicer, some are worse. I'm not a shill, please don't get mad at me. Now, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God said, "Let there be light!" And it was good.
Henceforth you shall be called Craig.
At birth, the calf weighs somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds. The males are typically castrated within the first couple of weeks, usually without anesthetic. The main point of this is to keep the steers mellow later in life, but it also stops their male hormones from giving the meat an off taste that the American palate isn't really accustomed to. Anyway, things started off pretty good for Craig. Drinking milk, hanging out, the life. After a while, he figures out you can eat the floor. That's cool. But then, after about 10 months, he gets loaded into the cattle cars. If you're a history buff like me, you know that's not a good sign. Little does Craig know, he's been auctioned off to a feedlot 1,000 miles away. Here, the cattle are packed together like sardines, if sardines were 500-pound terrestrial mammals. The menu consists of random roughage and energy-dense feed like corn so they can pack on the pounds more quickly. Overall, this environment puts a good deal of stress on the beast, which can end up taking a toll on his health. But it's nothing a little visit from the antibiotics fairy can't fix. Once fully grown, Craig gets taken to the packing plant. This is where the magic happens, and by magic we mean mechanically automated goring into commodities. This is where things get messy, so try to forget that we gave this random animal a name a minute ago. In order to keep things as humane as possible, a worker will first use this device, referred to as a stunner. Here's a demonstration. This renders the beast instantly unconscious, or worse, but potato at this point. Its ankle is then attached to a conveyor rail, which will gently guide the animal along the rest of its journey. First, the cow gets to talk to this man. He's called the sticker. Can you guess what he does? If you said that he gouges out throats for a living, you'd be correct. Over the course of about a minute, the flow goes from torrential downpour to incontinent poodle, by which point our beloved bovine can continue on his way. At the next station, the cow is subjected to high voltage electrical stimulation. Hopefully the nervous system is all out of steam by this point, but if not, the boys on the killing floor will have a great story to tell their wives. Haha, just kidding. The FDA estimates that 93% of meat worker marriages are in shambles. Who knew that 11 hours of pure slaughter every day could desensitize a man? Anyway, electrical stimulation basically works to speed up the onset of rigor mortis. Getting this process out of the way means the meat won't toughen up once it reaches the freezer. Next, the carcass undergoes a thorough power washing. Like the noble mortician, this hose works to make a lifetime of filth disappear. Unfortunately, though beauty is only skin deep, manure runs to the core, so the cow must be disemboweled to prevent contamination later on. And we might as well get rid of all these other gross bits while we're at it. Then the feds stick their nose in things to make sure everything is as it should be. Yup, it's a cow. Finally, we send it down the line, evacuate the spine, bifurcate the hind, reticulate the spline, and power wash it again just for good measure. This whole process from bashing to slashing to splashing takes a mere 15 minutes to complete. That means it takes the same amount of time to process 3 half-ton mammals and 1 scheduled license renewal. Try puzzling that one out. After hanging out in the cooler for a couple days, the beef is broken down into its many cuts: chuck, loin, sirloin, what have you. This is the good stuff. That'll get shipped off as is to barbecues, bar mitzvahs, and bargain bins all across the country. Then you got all these misfit bits hanging out wherever else. Still technically flesh, so we have machines pluck it off, pulp it, and use it to make hamburgers, hot dogs, and the like. Then all the garbage even Americans can't stomach is sent off to the rendering plant to be made into whatever else. So there you have it. I don't really have an outro, except kinda gross, right? Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about a few slang words that I never understood. First is chicken legs. Now if you know me, you know that I'm leaner than lean, so I've received this insult a couple times, hey chicken legs. But chicken legs really aren't that skinny. Here's a diagram of my leg, right? And here's the average chicken leg. Look at that. I wish I had that kind of calf definition. That's sexy as fuck. There are bodybuilders with less meat on their bones than that. And considering the fact that most people have interacted with the drumstick at some point in their lives, I'm frankly dumbfounded that anyone ever thought to use this to refer to skinny people. Then there's socking someone. Hey man, I'm trying to think of a new slang word for punching someone in the face really hard. Like just destroying someone with your fists. Got any ideas? How about one of the softest, gentlest, and most unassuming objects found in one's entire house? That's like kicking someone in the dick and being like, whoa bro, you just got feathered. Fuck you, don't try to downplay my suffering. If anything, I got shin bashed in the dick bag. That's the proper level of vulgarity relative to the situation. Anyway, it would make a little more sense if you said gloved, because at least those are socks for your hands. But no, it's nonsense. Next is blow, in reference to cocaine. It's a form of air movement, so I guess this one is like half correct, but it could still lead to a lot of confusion. Yo, y'all wanna do some blow? Oh gee whiz, well okie dokie. Oh, I'm feeling it. It's kicking in. Oh doggy, that's some nifty blow you got there, eh? Get out of my house. Next is nuts. When somebody is nuts, it means they're wild, they're crazy, they live life on the edge, right? What the fuck is so exciting about this? Finally, box. So box is a common slang word for one's lady bits, right? Now I've only been around 2 vaginas in my life. I came out of one of them when I was born, and I spent most of my time around the other one with my eyes closed, so my knowledge on that subject might be a little shaky. However, I have been around hundreds of thousands of boxes in my life. I know those inside and out, so that should make up for it. And let me tell you, these two things could not be less similar in shape. You see, boxes have corners. If your pussy has corners, you should probably start taking the tampons out of the container before you put them in. Likewise, if you compare the properties of either object, you'll notice that they're basically opposites in every way, so as a slang word, it's totally unfitting. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Ella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, let me tell you a story. This is about something that happened when I was around 11. One day I was just walking through the woods with my dog, not a care in the world, when I see this guy approaching from the other end. He was all by himself and he had a football. And every now and then he would just toss the football up in the air, catch it, and then keep walking. When I walked past him, he muttered something along the lines of, "Hey kid, you want some football?" I assume he was propositioning me to a game of catch. Or maybe he just didn't like that football very much, I'm not quite sure. But between this guy's strange nature and the fact that he was 17 and I was around 11, I turned him down. I took the dog home, and later that day, me and my friend were back at the woods, just hitting shit with sticks, I guess, I don't know, whatever kids do. We were mostly chilling in the same place, and a little ways in, I see the guy walk past again. I think it's a bit strange, but as he turns the corner, I neglect to mention anything to my friend about my previous encounter. Around 2 minutes later, I hear some grown man shouting angrily, and my friend and I turn to look. Somehow, we were so engrossed in our nothing we were doing, that we somehow failed to notice the giant plumes of smoke rising up from where that guy turned the corner. I'm talking huge, like if a member of the Vape Nation happened to see these clouds, he'd probably go into diabetic shock. The shouts were coming from our neighbor, whose house bordered on the woods, and he must have spotted the smoke before we did. So he's shouting things along the lines of,
What the fuck do you think you're doing? I'm gonna call the fucking cops on you. What is this?
That's when the guy goes fucking ballistic.
No, please, I don't want to go to jail. It was an accident.
And a few high-pitched screeches which I don't think I'm able to replicate. My friend and I walk over to get a closer look. We see the guy standing on the edge of this huge ground fire. I'm talking at least 10 meters in diameter. Pitch black grass, smoke rising up, flames still around the edges. Now this guy must have been like a Boy Scout or something, because, like I said, it was about a minute and a half between him turning the corner and hearing the guy shouting. Maybe the football was just a propane tank he painted brown? Could have been a pyromancer for all I know. It was about that time that my friend and I realized that, as two young hip delinquents, it was not in our best interest to be standing in the near vicinity of a forest fire, so we skedaddled. As we heard sirens approach in the distance, I couldn't help but wonder what this guy's motive was. A few days later, I found out the guy lived somewhat nearby, and that he had mild autism. Yeah, that cleared a good bit up for me, because I have a couple friends on the spectrum, and they're good people, but sometimes they just do things. Nowhere near full-blown arson, mind you, more just along the lines of screaming fuck at the teacher and then walking out in the middle of class. But you get the idea. So the moral of the story here, kids, is that if somebody wants to play catch with you, you let them, or else they might unleash the fucking inferno. Hey kids, today I'll be discussing the alcoholic equivalents of the various allotropes of carbon. For those of you that don't know, an allotrope is just the various forms that carbon atoms can arrange themselves into. But anyway, let's get started. So amorphous carbon is like beer. It's the first form to ever be produced by humans, likely by accident. It's also the weakest form. It has a bunch of varieties, most of which taste terrible, and you need a whole lot of it if you want to have a good cookout. Graphite is like wine. It's almost as old as amorphous carbon, having been used by humans since ancient times. However, it's significantly stronger. Up until recently, only the rich could really get much enjoyment out of it. But today, most individuals can use it if they choose, but not all varieties are equal. Diamond is like vodka. First of all, it's very strong, the strongest form that's likely to be found in the average household. It's typically valued based on its purity and clarity, though flavored varieties do exist. Though it can be manufactured right here at home, most people seem to prefer it when it's from far-off lands. And remember never to use too much of it or else you might regret it later. Graphene is like brandy. It's similar to graphite in structure, but it's put through a process to make it more pure, and as a result, it's much stronger. Fullerenes are like absinthe. It's not as mainstream as the other varieties, mostly only being used by the intellectual types. It's also claimed to have a bunch of properties not shared by any other form out there. But despite all its hype, it has little real-world application currently. Finally, carbine is like pure alcohol. Despite its simplicity, it's extremely difficult to produce with current methods, except in very small amounts. If you were to have a bunch of it, however, it would be more than twice as strong as diamonds. Hopefully, this forced analogy has been at least vaguely informational. But anyway, that's all for today. I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, let me talk to you about dog breeding. Nowadays, dogs are mostly around just to be a cute companion, right? So breeding has gone from functionality to cuteness. And that's fine, as long as it stays within the bounds of nature. But that's not enough for today's breeder. So, how do you make a dog cuter? Apparently, by giving it disgusting genetic deformities. And chances are, you, the listener, agree with that. You just don't know you do. Let me show you what I mean. See this? This is a relatively normal dog. Notice the snout, the eyes, the shape of the head. Not too far gone from the wolves that today's dogs come from. Now let me take you through some other breeds. First is the Bull Terrier. 100 years ago, still looked pretty normal, right? Now here's today's version. Jesus! Who needs snouts, right? Let's just give it a long, continuous, boomerang-shaped head with 2 tiny holes at the end. Seriously, it looks like Toucan Sam is trying to fit inside a dog costume. And look at its eyes! They're permanently pointed up at the sky as if to say, God, why did you let me become this? Please kill me. Do you guys remember Spuds MacKenzie, the old Bud Light mascot? Well, I just realized why they chose a Bull Terrier of all dogs. It's because he looked like his mom drank nothing but Bud Light for her entire pregnancy. Next up is the Pug. I'll probably get some hate for this one, but I don't care. They've been bred specifically to look like they've been smashed in the goddamn face with a frying pan. And because of this, because of their fact that their skull is shaped like a fucking tuna can, they can barely breathe their whole lives. Ever been around a pug? Constantly, no matter the temperature or the weather, they sit there going, gah, 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 And people think this shit is cute. If my baby came out with a flat nose, hair lip, cylindrical head, and no neck going I'd be like, Jesus fuck, put it back in. It's clearly not done yet. Next is the dachshund. Now there is no excuse for this one. The head's fine, right? But the body, good God. It's got a torso shaped like a goddamn doorstop with those pointless legs just kind of stapled on. Now it's been a little while since I reminded you what a normal dog looks like, so here. Now let me go into Photoshop real quick and do all the changes necessary to make this dog look like a dachshund. Look at that. That's not okay. Why even have legs at this point? Might as well just keep going until it's just a drumstick from the neck down. And there's no reason. It's just one day someone was like, well, people like dogs, and people like ferrets, so why don't we make some chimera abomination halfway in between the two, and see what happens. My least favorite breed, though, out of all of them, it's just straight up fucked in every way. A testament to humankind's never-ending corruption of the natural world. I'm talking about the Chihuahua. It's like somebody took a normal dog and boiled away every aspect except for anger and neuroticism, leaving this tiny hell creature behind. And this is one of the nicer pictures I could find. Take a look at this. Someone call a priest. And we let these things inhabit our homes. This poor woman's gonna wake up with her fucking nose chewed off and just be like, oh, Mr. Wiggles was a little hungry this morning, wasn't he? Meanwhile, the dog's just sitting there like, bloodlust. The only time they're not being needlessly aggressive towards people, it's when they're off pissing, shitting, and vomiting all over their surroundings. And you would think such a small dog would at least produce manageable waste, but much like the creature itself, the small things it does expel are straight up toxic. It's like some of the Chihuahua's pent-up hatred for the mortal plane manifests itself in every dump it takes. I would rather clean up a full-grown man's shit from my floor than wipe up the septic nightmare that is Chihuahua squirts. The only good thing about owning a Chihuahua is that if it ever gets rabies, it'll be fine, because you won't be able to tell the goddamn difference. It'll still be sitting there, business as usual. So that's my little rant about the monstrosities that live right beneath our noses. I'm Sam Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about the Great Emu War. So here's what happened, right? Our story begins in Australia, home of the upside down whopper. The year is 1932. A very large chunk of the country's population lives on homesteads, just putting seeds in the ground and waiting for food to show up, you know. But their lives are hard. Firstly, Australian soil kind of blows. It's pretty terrible for farming. Like on a scale from Margaret Thatcher's corpse to Octomom, Australia's soil is a solid Hillary Clinton in fertility. Secondly, the whole Great Depression thing's going on, which automatically makes everything suck worse. And third, and possibly most important, is the emu infestation. These gangly dill holes were all over the place, just walking on crops and crapping on crops and crapping on walks and cropping on craps and crabbing on docks and captain on the rocks. You get the idea. So the government evaluated the situation. They were like, well, let's see, let's weigh our options here. As a government, we could start spending even more money to secure the welfare of our citizens through this socioeconomic crisis, money that we barely even have. Or, alternatively, we could just start fucking slaughtering emus, so at least it looks like we're helping. So that's what they did. Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Australian military was put in command of the operation, and he had a total of 2 soldiers at his disposal, each of which had a light machine gun. Additionally, the pair was given a total of 10,000 rounds of ammunition to be spent on taking out emus. So on paper, that sounds like a piece of cake. They're basically just big turkeys on stilts, so how hard could it be? Well, apparently, pretty frickin' hard. Let me learn you kids a thing or two about emus. First of all, emus are tough as hell. Their bodies are basically like meat-laden tanks. They can definitely take a bullet or 3 and still keep running long enough to get away. Secondly, these fuckers have tactics. Like guerrilla warfare, it ain't got shit on emu warfare. They start out in a big herd or flock or pod, I don't really know. Let me Google it. Okay, a group of emus is technically called a mob. So you got a big mob of emus, right? And as soon as they sense danger, they break up into a bunch of little mobs and start scattering in every direction. So if you're spraying them down with a machine gun, you can't just whip it around all over the place. You have to focus your fire on one group at a time, meaning most of the others could get away pretty easily. I don't know if they had like a huddle beforehand or if this is just some coincidental product from their ridiculous bird minds, but it was effective either way. So between these two things, taking out the emus ended up being a huge struggle. Here's
here's the story on what happened. So the crew went out in search of emus. The first time they found a mob, they started shooting before the guns were in range, so most of the emus got away. The second time, they waited until the emus were closer, but then the gun jammed, so most of the emus got away. And this sort of pattern went on for a while. At one point, they tried getting on the back of a truck first so they could chase down the mob, but the truck wasn't fast enough to catch up, and the ride was so bumpy that they couldn't aim properly, so most of the emus got away. By the time they got a fourth of the way through their ammo, after 2,500 shots, only 300 or so had been killed, which is tiny compared to the 20,000 birds said to be roaming the outback. At this point, they were like, alright, if I have to look at one more of these Jimmy-legged big bird wannabes, I'm gonna start screaming, so you know what? Fuck it. Let the farmers handle it. Then the farmers were like, hey jackholes, we're still starving out here. You still haven't given us those subsidies you promised. We had to feed the kids fucking dingo meat, which, you know, it's a nice change of pace to have the kids eating the dingoes for once, but that's beside the point. Could you dicks keep at least trying to help us? Thanks. The guys were like, alright, don't get your bogans in a bundle. We'll keep going if only to prove a point. So they kept going, just finding mobs, thinning them out slightly, rinse and repeat, until finally they only had like 100 bullets left. In total, the unit only had 986 confirmed kills. Some emus might have also died from their wounds after the fact, but still, a very large portion of the hordes was still alive. So the military was forced to surrender for real this time. Yes, that's right, kids. The emus won the war. Of course, their victory didn't last too long, because after the failed operation, the government put out a bounty on the emus. And that worked pretty well. Something like 50,000 bounties ended up being cashed out over 6 months in 1934. So the lesson here, kids, is that if you want to commit mass murder, don't crowdfund. Crowdsource. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, animal test subjects have always been an important facet of science, since they allow us to study physiology in more destructive ways than we could get away with on humans. So it should come as no surprise that, over the years, there's been a lot of creatures haphazardly thrown at the cosmos against their will. Here's a bunch of smelly animals that achieved more in their short lives than you ever will. Quick disclaimer, this is by no means a comprehensive list, not even close, we'd be here all day if it was, more so just a highlight reel of the ones I found the most interesting. So the Great Zoo in the Sky was first founded in 1947 when the US launched a craft containing a bunch of fruit flies 68 miles into the air in order to see what kind of horrible mutants would get made from all the cosmic radiation up there. Unfortunately, they were totally fine, so the Earth was like, hey, living things can go into space and not die instantly, supple. And the next year they decided to send up a rhesus macaque named Albert, which it seems kind of like jumping the gun to go from barely alive specks to basically a person in one step. If it were me, I would have thrown like a frog or a gerbil in between there, but whatever, I'm no cosmopolitan. Anyway, Albert died of suffocation on the way up and never really made it to space alive. Fun fact, this rocket was actually a V-2 missile stolen from the Germans after World War II. So just in case any of you have any sympathy for those Nazi characters, they're technically responsible for the death of a poor innocent space monkey. Pretty condemning if you ask me. But I guess the US felt pretty bad about it, so they decided to deal with their grief by naming the next monkey Albert 2. Pretty unhealthy coping mechanism according to my shrink, but she also thinks Punk is dead, so what does she know? This Albert actually made it into space alive through a grand effort incorporating all the incredible cutting-edge technology that the atomic era had to offer. And after all that, they goofed on the parachute, so Albert 2 turned into a fine red mist on impact, which just goes to prove the age-old adage, you can lead a monkey to space, but you can't make him land. There were a few more Alberts after this. Albert 3 fucking exploded. Albert 4 made it up, but he had another tissue paper parachute what don't work for heck, so he's out. Albert 5, yet again, bad chute, liquefied on impact, until finally, in 1951, on Albert number 6, they figured out how to make a big blanket that consistently makes you not immediately die when you fall from the sky, and the monkey was recovered alive from the capsule, alongside his 11 mouse roommates. Of course, he died 2 hours later, but hey, still counts. Earlier that same year, Russia launched 2 little pupniks named Tsigan and Dzik, both of whom came back unharmed. These 2 were the first vertebrates to ever leave Earth and come back alive. Then in 57, the Reds snagged another achievement by putting the first living thing into orbit, besides the bacteria clinging to Sputnik 1, but they're losers, we don't talk about them. Specifically, they launched one brave and daring dog from the streets of Moscow, probably the most famous animal to ever go into space. You know its name well. That dog is, of course, Airbud. Unlike those other guys we talked about, Laika was never planned to be recovered intact, since we barely knew how to put something into orbit by this time, let alone bring it back. But they still wanted to make sure she stayed alive long enough to at least reach space. So before the mission, they put her through the most rigorous canine space camp that Russia had to offer, throwing her in a centrifuge for a while to get her used to G-force, making her cage progressively smaller to get her used to cramped spaces, which made her just not shit anymore at all, but that's a different story. They also switched her diet to a special high nutrition gel that she would have eaten after takeoff, had her brain not crapped out from overheating within the first few hours. In '59, the US strapped 2 monkeys to the nose cone of a Jupiter missile and actually got them back alive afterwards, which is crazy mostly because these things withstood 38 Gs of acceleration. For context, that's the force that makes even trained pilots lose consciousness times 4, or this thing times 12, or roughly the same forced experience when you realize that's not a normal speed bump, but one of those evil tiny ones that ruin your life, you know the ones. Well, that's what you get for doing 25 near a hospital, Sam. Well, hey, good thing I'm already here considering the ballistics test that just went down between the roof of my car and my frickin' skull. Jesus. So in '61, we graduated from monkeys to great apes, sending up a chimpanzee named Ham. Remember Space Chimps? Yeah, it was that. Frame for frame, Andy Samberg and all. What's special about Ham is that he was actually trained to pull levers and slap buttons while up in the ship, being rewarded banana pellets for completing tasks and getting his feet tased whenever he messed up. Sounds like a cartoon, I know, but I promise it's for real. Meanwhile, the Soviets were busy putting a big, bald, smart ape into orbit, no big deal. France saw the US and Russia sending up monkeys and dogs and felt left out, so in '63, they launched a cat into space and were like, yeah, that's cool and unique. I'm one of the popular kids now. In '68, the Soviets saw the rabbit making rice cakes on the moon and said, how about a tortoise for that hare, launching 2 of them into deep space, all the way around the moon and back to Earth, where they were recovered alive after their capsule landed in the ocean. Kinda cheating when you are your own crash suit, but an impressive feat regardless. In '73, we put mummy chogs in space. What's a mummy chog? It's one of these things. Like a fish, but real rough and tumble. Tolerates low oxygen, weird pressure, high salinity, dishwasher safe, Energy Star rated, you name it, sister. At first they could only swim in circles, but after a couple weeks, they actually adapted to 0G and figured out how to maneuver properly. Even more interesting, we also brought mummy chog eggs, and when these hatched, the little mummy choglets knew how to swim in 0G immediately. Kinda spooky, honestly. That same mission also sent up some spiders, who managed to spin some webs. Trash webs, mind you, but hey, they managed. In '78, The Muppet Show aired Pigs in Space for the first time. In '85, we cut off the arms of a bunch of newts and sent them up to see if they grow back the same way. The reasoning behind this being, if a newt can't grow stuff back, then an astronaut with a paper cut probably can't either. Fortunately, they rearmed themselves at the normal rate, so all's good on that front. Around the same time, NASA actually had talks with Sesame Street about sending Big Bird up on the space shuttle as a publicity stunt. This is real. The plan ultimately fell through after they realized Big Bird is fucking giant and unwieldy at all times, literally the worst possible choice for a celebrity cameo on a space shuttle. So instead they sent a school teacher in his place. And then the Challenger fucking exploded. Let me reiterate. There is a timeline not too far from this one where Big Bird is a casualty in the single worst astronautical disaster in history. A tiny evil part of me almost wishes that happened, like that's just so indescribably absurd. In the early 90s, we sent up some baby jellyfish to grow up in space just for laughs. They figured out how to maneuver just fine, but when we brought them back down, they literally didn't have a concept of gravity and couldn't orient themselves properly in their new environment. Which, being a jellyfish is the easiest thing there is. You just kinda exist, maybe squirm a little now and then. So when you manage to somehow mess that up, you know things have gone seriously wrong. In 2003, the US sent up a bunch of invertebrates, including silkworms, spiders, carpenter bees, and harvester ants. Whoops, they exploded. In '07, some tardigrades went up, totally exposed to the vacuum of space for 10 days, which, surprise, surprise, they were fine. On that same mission, a cockroach gave birth, creating the first organism that we know of to ever have been conceived outside of Earth. And finally, in 2018, Elon Musk sent a big basket of mice to the International Space Station. Just, 'cause he can. So those are just a handful of God's creatures who got to experience the majesty of not knowing up from down. If you're like me, you're probably a little jealous. Why does an ugly ape get to go into space, but I don't? I wish to bear witness to the music of the spheres firsthand, in a way that a lower creature could never appreciate. You know why you feel like that? Because you're a nerd. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I still don't know what Ligma is.
Hey kids, as we all know, the evolution of species is an incredible process, driven by little more than the random chance that certain mutations may happen to provide a practical advantage in a creature's environment. And as a result, there's a lot of things out there that look super dumb once you strip back a few layers. Here's the top 10 worst animal skeletons of all time. So first and foremost, I'd like to settle a little debate I've been seeing floating around the past few weeks. Yes, penguins do, in fact, have knees, but in order to hide full-grown legs into one plump cylinder, you gotta have a little skeletal trickery on your side. You guys ever do wall sits in gym class or elsewhere? One of the most torturous exercises out there. I now feel even worse for penguins, because not only did they have to deal with living in a frigid black and white hellscape, the most hostile environment known to man second only to the vacuum of space, all the while constantly pursued by ravenous bloodthirsty sea dogs, but they're also secretly doing wall sits their entire life. Quick side note, in Mandarin, the word for penguin consists of the characters for business goose, which is fucking hilarious. Like one day a goose put on a suit and said, "Today it is time to make a name for myself, honk." This next guy is known as Parsons chameleon, found in the more remote regions of Madagascar. Notice the fleshy protuberances around its nose area. Turns out, not fleshy, not even remotely fleshy, not even one flesh. Instead, it just has a skull forever frozen in time in the middle of exploding, like it sneezed right in the middle of God shaping it out of clay, and he was just like, whatever, it's a feature now. So for that, this rough-headed reptilian gets number 9. Normally I would have ranked it higher, but that's a dope tale, so he gets some pity points. Next is the pufferfish. So for most of my life, I've pictured pufferfish as just not having any bones. I know it doesn't really make sense, but neither does them turning into a balloon like a goddamn cartoon. Turns out, in their normal state, they actually look like this, and when they inflate, those concentric rings of spines slide outwards past one another to cover the full area, like the aperture of a camera lens expanding to cover the full frame of the fish. The sheer ingenuity of this design has shattered my childhood dream of real-life balloon animals, which has earned the pufferfish the number 8 spot on this list. Now, if you've gotten around to certain zoological circles, you've been shown this skull and been told, yes, that comes from the dwarf elephant. Oh, you've never seen one? That's because, they're extinct. And that thing in the middle? Yes, nothing more than the nose hole to which the trunk connects. However, if you're a rational, free-thinking adult like me, you can look past the lies spoon-fed to you by Nat Geo and other liberal media outlets and see this for what it is. A cyclops. Next is the orca, otherwise known as the killer whale, the panda torpedo, or the SeaWorld slave. Its skeleton is fairly normal at first glance, but check out this little thing under here. That little bony blip is actually all that remains of the legs and pelvis of the orca from when it evolved from land mammals. Personally, I think that's highly disrespectful to their ancestors. Like, they could have taken the seal route and used those legs for good in the water, but instead these sea cowards said, no thanks, we're gonna undo all that evolution and just be bigger, smarter, warmer fish again. But hey, we'll keep this little piece of nothing just to remember you guys by. Truthfully, I could have chosen almost any cetacean to pick on for this, but the orca's face also reminds me of SCP-682, which is the most OP overrated shit out there, so he gets the number 6 spot. Moving on, now bear with me here. In every other mammal on Earth, the canine teeth point downward from the gum to the mouth. You know, like a tooth. But this guy, known as the Babirusa, said, "Huh," and decided to have them grow up through the entirety of its fucking snoot and out the other end, which is the most nonsensical thing I've ever seen. Like, toenails out the front? How cliche. Let's make them go through the whole foot instead. Look, now I can kick good behind me. That's not all though. These tusks also keep growing for the creature's entire life, which isn't a problem in and of itself, right? Rodents, they keep chewing stuff to wear them down. Alligators, they just let them fall out now and then. But the Babirusa's like, pfft, I'll just nut in a lady pig long before this becomes an issue. So if it lives long enough, the teeth can curve right on around and slowly bore into the thing's face, like built-in Chinese bamboo torture. And occasionally, they can end up actually piercing the skull and shish kebabbing the brain. Now some people might say that this doesn't belong on this list, given that teeth aren't technically bones. And to those people, kids, we say, eat shit and die. Next we have the octopus. The octopus skeleton is so bad that it doesn't even exist. Sure, they got this little thing in the middle, but that doesn't count, that's just chitin. And yeah, they can get in a jar or whatever, but at what cost? At the animal picnics, the crowd shouts, "Bleh, shun the spineless freak." And at the animal wheelbarrow races, with nothing to grab hold of, the cephalopod holds a solitary vigil at the starting line. And lo, the octopus wins naught but a participant medal at the Grand Prix and the number 4 spot.
on this list. Moving on, here's the skeleton of a fruit bat. Now, not a big deal to us regular folk, but imagine if humans had no context of bats and they dug this thing up. Like, class, archaeologists have recently found these fossilized remains, and using modern technology, we can see exactly what it would have looked like back when it was alive. This abominable creature is known only to scientists as Finger Boy, and is theorized to have fed upon fruit, insects, and the dreams of orphans, which it would siphon out from the ears of the errant little waifs whilst they slumbered. By the way, if you Google image bat skeleton, like more than half of them have the ears built in, just like, I feel the extraordinarily bat-like wings and figure of our decoration are much too subtle for our consumers. Better slap these on. At number 2, we have the anteater. From its oboe-like skull to its gorilla fist and hands, one can only wonder who let this creature exist. Fun fact, if you take the anteater's skull and blow into its nose, it plays a beautiful song recounting the animal's entire life, and then security escorts you out of the museum. Looking at this, I can only pose the question asked for generations long before my own. That being, why the long face? Before we get to the number 1 spot, here's a few honorable mentions. The wolf eel. The ostrich. This human-cat hybrid I found on a tabloid site. And of course, the mermaid. So at our number 1 spot, we have this creature. That's supposed to be a mirror. I know most of you can't see yourself in it on account of your filthy Dorito smeared screen, so just take my word for it. So what's wrong with humans, you ask? Well, a lot of things, but for now let's stick to the skeleton. First off, these bones right here, these are known as the metatarsals. All part of the foot, right? No, that's a bunch of primate propaganda. In most other groups of land mammals, what we'd consider our ankles is actually the quote-unquote knee of the animal. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Also, it's estimated that around 80% of people will experience chronic back pain at some point in their life. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Lastly, probably something you've heard about at some point, our skull to pelvis ratio. For most animals, giving birth, not a big deal. Small heads, wide hips, mazel tov. But check out the big brain on Brett. Throws a real monkey wrench in the works there. For a while it led to some problems till those extra brains figured out how to work around it, so I guess you win this round, humans. But that doesn't stop you from also winning the number 1 spot on the worst skeletons of all time. But hey, just cause you'll forever be flawed on the inside, doesn't mean you can't improve yourself on the outside. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I'm still scared of swine flu.
Hey, little Jimmy.
Yeah, what's up?
Do you like Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah, it's alright.
So do you think it'd be fun to be a pirate?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You couldn't be more wrong.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, I know. At some point, every kid has dreamed about being a swashbuckling, corn-shuckling, wife-cuckling, cocksuckling pirate, but trust me when I say, it was really not all it's cracked up to be. First, we'll talk about the food. So one staple of the pirate diet was salted meat, usually wild oxen or pork. And I love jerky as much as the next guy, but this wasn't like a bag of Jack Links. In fact, it was probably closer in texture to your shoes than any meat you've ever eaten. In those days, you couldn't just snap into a Slim Jim. That's a modern luxury that we take for granted. Back then, the slogan was, gnaw on a Slim Jim for minutes on end, grinding it between your molars while the gallons of salt turn your mouth into a desert until the mangled hunk of flesh in your mouth is just soft enough to be shoved down your greasy fucking pirate throat without tearing a hole. Another essential food item was known as hardtack. This was essentially just flour and water baked into a cracker-like brick. Beyond the fact that it was totally flavorless, hardtack was also extremely dense, to the point where pirates would often have to slam their fists down on it in order to break it into pieces small enough to fit in their mouth. As long as it was kept dry, hardtack almost never spoiled, although it often became infested with weevils. Excuse me, sir? I'm a vegan, so can I have a new piece? One without any of Mother Nature's beautiful creatures in it? Thanks. Wait a minute, is this gluten-free? This better be hemp rope! Nah, but the weevils didn't make you sick or change the taste all that much, so, and this is true, the crew would just eat it in the dark, so that way they couldn't tell if they were eating a normal chunk or a weevily one. Then there's the crowding. So pirate ships typically packed in as many crew members as possible, because more pirates means more manpower when you go to board an enemy ship. Of course, the downside to that is that you're basically like a bunch of hairy, unwashed sardines. Let me illustrate what a typical night below deck was like. So you're sprawled out on the damp, musty wood floor. Everything's pitch black, you can't see a thing. The smell of the filth and the mold forces you to only breathe through your mouth. Suddenly, your left hand feels wet. Probably just seawater leaking through the hull. You sniff your hand, nope, No, that's piss. You feel something furry rub up against your elbow. It was either the body of a diseased rat or the beard of your diseased crewmate. Either way, that's probably where the piss came from. Some guy's moaning loudly in the next room. Hopefully he's just jerking off, because if he's dying, that's one more body to deal with in the morning. Rinse and repeat for 8 hours, and then it's daytime. The poor diet and cramped conditions led to disease being a huge problem aboard pirate ships. The most well-known of these diseases is scurvy, where you don't get enough vitamin C. When scurvy first begins, you just kind of feel tired all the time, no big deal. Then you get weird spots on your skin and your gums start bleeding. This progresses until all your teeth fall out and all of your body's mucous membranes start gushing blood and pus, causing you to die. So that's a lot of fun. There were tons of other diseases too. I won't go through them all, but here's a few honorable mentions. Also, some people say that alcoholism is a disease. I might just be disturbed, but that's one sickness I could definitely get down with. If it is a disease, then yeah, just about every pirate had this one. If anything though, I'd call that one of the few upsides of pirate life. Finally, there's the combat. So you've gone through all these disgusting, horrible living conditions, but at least you can enjoy the thrill of battle, right? Swinging from rope to rope, sword in your mouth, long, intense saber duels, that kind of thing. But that's typically not how it went down. For one thing, when pirates boarded a ship, 9 times out of 10, they'd just surrender immediately. Because what are a bunch of well-groomed merchants gonna do against a horde of disgusting barbarians? If the defending ship did decide to fight back though, the resulting brawl wouldn't be anything like the movies. It'd be way worse, like immediate R rating. Because pirates rely a lot on brutality, both because they don't have much real training, and because it scares the shit out of people. If you were a deckhand on an invaded ship and you were stupid enough to fight back, you wouldn't be dancing around doing flips and shit, none of that. Instead, they'd probably shoot you in the stomach with a flintlock pistol, kick you to the ground, chop off your shoulder blade with a hand axe, gouge out your eyes with a marlin spike, wind your intestines around the prow, and then toss your twitching body overboard. And that's only a slight exaggeration. Honestly, if Jack Sparrow got attacked by actual pirates, he wouldn't last a second. It's kinda like a used car salesman going to prison, like, "I'll be fine. If anybody tries intimidating me, I can get out of it with my quick wit and charming personality. Boy, you look real pretty from behind." Oh wow, I'm boned. So yeah, in short, if you were thinking about pulling a Captain Phillips anytime soon, I'd advise against it. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, so we all know that, as far as living things go, humans win, not even a contest. But it turns out, if you hop to the next genome over and look real carefully, you can actually see a basic version of a lot of the stuff that makes us so great. Here's some stories about what chimpanzees can get down to in the right context. Talking about chimp tails. Now, North Korea's Pyongyang Central Zoo has a colorful history, from its humble beginnings as literally just 50 badgers in a fence, to the parrot they taught to recite poetry praising Kim Il-sung, to being the only place in Pyongyang where you can look at a dog legally. It seems the only thing that's remained constant throughout this zoo's life is that it's fucking depressing. Fortunately, both workers and animals alike found ways to cope, one of which is smoking. Azalea the chimp is currently 13 years old and is one of the shining stars of Pyongyang Zoo, purely for her ability to burn through over a pack a day. Now, I like a good old-fashioned smoking chimp as much as the next guy, but whereas most zookeepers would probably try to talk her out of something so unhealthy, the North Korean ones actually gave her supplies, just like, feeling trapped, welcome to the club, pal. Her skills are actually pretty impressive. Not only can she use a lighter, but in a pinch, she also knows the old schoolyard trick of lighting one ciggy with the other. Just a shame that her mind wasn't put towards something a little more healthy or productive. Nah, you know what? That's pretty dope, actually. I'm happy with that. Flashback to 1954. A chimp named Congo was born in the London Zoo. Little did anybody know, this ape was a prodigy. Out of curiosity, one of his zookeepers, named Desmond Morris, decided to give Congo a pencil and a piece of cardboard to see what he'd do. Almost immediately, he started drawing some rudimentary lines and shapes. Morris was like, whoa, and decided to let him try painting on for size. And what he saw was incredible. Congo created these beautiful renderings with a blend of realism and self-expression that would make even the great masters stare in awe. Nah, just fucking with you, they're garbage. But for a non-human, there's still something to be appreciated here. Congo had at least a very basic sense of composition. Like, you can see there's some balance to the images. Matter of fact, when his handler would make shapes on one side of the page, Congo would deliberately mark up the other side to maintain some kind of symmetry. He also had an artist's sense of self-entitlement, because whenever his owner tried to take away a picture before Congo thought it was finished, he'd literally go apeshit, all throwing a fit and screaming till they gave it back. But hey, painting done by a chimp. You know who likes pointless novelties like that? The incredibly rich.
bitch. In 2005, 3 of Congo's paintings were up for auction next to works by 2 obscure little artists known as Andy Warhol and Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And while the 2 actual artist pieces went completely unsold, these 3 beauties got picked up for the scant price of over 25,000 US dollars. And the guy was like, wow, I felt something for a second there. I really like the watermark on this, by the way. Like, this is my painting done by a chimp. Anyway, next we have this beast called Washoe. Washoe was the first non-human creature to learn to communicate through sign language. That's right, eat shit, Coco. Prior experiments in chimp communication had attempted to teach him some basic spoken language, but after realizing that chimps are physically incapable of making most of the noises we do, they decided signing would be the better option. Washoe was raised in an environment similar to what a human child would experience, complete with toys, clothes, chores, and even being allowed to sit at the dinner table, in spite of what the Bible clearly says about that. The scientists raising Washoe made sure to only communicate in American Sign Language around her, in the hopes of establishing a true conversational rapport. Initially, they took a traditional Pavlovian approach by rewarding proper use of a new sign with food and tickles. But there were a couple problems with this. Firstly, the simple action reward setup meant that Washoe didn't have to really understand the words she was signing, the same way a parrot saying I love you in a YouTube video always does it with those cold, unfeeling eyes. Secondly, Washoe would break into a laughing fit whenever they tickled her, to the point where the lesson would be essentially over. So the researchers abandoned this and instead just let her learn through observation of her caretaker signing, with much better results even in the total absence of reward stimuli. And the only downside was that the job title of designated chimp tickler ceased to exist. In total, Washoe learned around 350 individual signs in ASL, and she'd even use these to formulate novel phrases for new objects. Like one time she wanted to talk about a thermos, but didn't know what a thermos was. She goes, metal cup of drink. Hey, scat! A similar story comes from a chimp named Lucy, who was raised by one Dr. Maurice Temerlin and his wife, Jane. The tale of Lucy's life is why this woman is now officially the 3rd most famous woman named Jane who worked with apes. In the same vein as Washoe, the pair attempted to gain some insight into Lucy's weird chimp noggin by raising her like you would a human. You know, dressing herself, using silverware, making tea, looking at magazines, pretending she knows what a word is, all that jazz. But as Lucy matured, things took an ugly turn. For one, since she was brought up in a basically human environment, she eventually discovered the time-tested human pastime of alcohol. The pair would leave bottles of gin around their home with Lucy, which, I don't know how you'd make this mistake twice, but it was apparently a common occurrence for them to leave her alone for too long and come back like, honey, I think the monkey's fucking wasted. Again. Another one of her hobbies was sculpting crude human heads out of poop. Her own poop, to be clear. They also left some copies of Playgirl magazine around for Lucy to flip through, which she became very fond of. So fond, in fact, that she was caught multiple times, having relations with the vacuum cleaner. I don't understand the mechanics of it, cause no source I found ever went into detail, and believe me, I wanted to know as much as you do. All I know is that, all things considered, some pretty exemplary tool use there. So the pair saw this and they were like, alright, we gotta get this chimp laid, and fast. But the problem was, Lucy was conversing with people, eating with people, flicking the old chimp bean to people, so it's not a stretch to think that Lucy thought she was people. So imagine you're people, and you get thrown into an enclosure with a full-grown, horny male chimp. You'd have a fucking panic attack. And that's just what Lucy did. As the years went on, Lucy got more and more violent, regularly trashing the place to get out the frustration of not being able to comprehend what was so fundamentally unnatural about her existence. Finally, the couple had had enough and decided to take Lucy to a primate rehabilitation center in the Gambia, with the hopes that she could be forced to acclimate to primate life. She could barely cope with it at first, getting real depressed and hardly associating with the other apes. Which you'd be depressed too if you had to give up a life of American luxury complete with booze and vacuum fornicating to go live with chimps in the wild. But with the help of a graduate student named Janice, Lucy eventually came to accept her fate, and although she'd never mate with another of her kind, she ended up getting along with her troop well enough. About a year after leaving the rehab center, Janice came back to visit, and Lucy gave her a warm embrace before waddling back to the rest of the chimps. Aww. Then Lucy got poached like a fucking egg, which kinda puts a damper on the whole happy ending, but you know, whatever. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I fell down the stairs this morning.
Hey kids, time for another hot steamy load of knowledge dripping down your neck and chest. Today, we're gonna talk about the greatest mind to ever live. Nope, not him. Nope. Keep trying. Who I'm really referring to is the ancient Greek philosopher known as Diogenes of Sinope. Diogenes followed the school of thought known as cynicism. Far from the yelling at CNN, sitting down during the pledge kind of cynicism we know today, cynic philosophy centers around the rejection of conventional desires in favor of a simple, moderate lifestyle. But while many philosophers made a virtue out of self-discipline, Diogenes took all that to a whole new level. He was the most down-to-earth guy out there. Literally, he lived on the ground, in a big tub in the marketplace where he'd beg for a living. For a while, his only possession was a wooden bowl, until one day he saw a child drinking out of his hands, and he was like, what do I need this shit for? Now, though his way of life and perspective was unique enough, it's the way Diogenes showed it that really set him apart from the rest. When someone today wants to go against society, they dye their hair blue and make a blog post about how there aren't any obese women of color in Super Smash Bros. On the other hand, when Diogenes has something to say, he just jerks off in public. Takes a dump in the amphitheater, pisses on passerby, whatever. The way he saw it, he was just performing much needed bodily functions while also protesting the superficiality of the civilization around him. Keep in mind, though he was an unwashed, publicly defecating homeless man, that's not all he was. His wit was easily on par with his philosophical contemporaries, and his lack of inhibition meant that everyone knew it. For example, here's an often pondered question of the day. How do you define a human in the simplest of terms possible? Plato decided to tackle this question, and he came up with featherless biped. And in the ancient Greek world, they didn't have any kangaroos or gibbons or nothing, so people were the only things around that both walked on two legs and didn't have feathers. Plato thought he was real clever with that one. Diogenes, on the other hand, he wasn't having any of it. So he said, alright, you pompous prick, I'll give you a featherless biped. So, in reality, we do not learn, and what we call learning is only a process of recollection. Oh goddammit, not you again. What's up, fuckers? Hey, check out this person I found. Isn't it such a human? Look at him, wow. What a guy. Anyway, love to stay and chat, but I saw some trash outside that looked delicious. Smell you later, deliberator. Yes, my student. Yeah, what the fuck? Here's another anecdote. Macedonian King Alexander was a big fan of Diogenes, so he decided to pay him a visit. And he said, hey man, big fan. If there's any favor I can do for you, anything at all, just let me know, I'll make it happen. Now to put this into perspective, this is Alexander we're talking about. The guy who had his cousin straight up assassinated so he could take the throne. The guy who would later go on to conquer the majority of the civilized world. And you know what Diogenes says? He goes, yeah, you can do me a favor. Move over, you're in my light. Wow, I'm not even mad. You really are just a legend. Diogenes lived up to the ripe old age of 89. I don't know if that's a testament to his lifestyle or if he just got lucky, but either way, if there is a god, he definitely has a sense of humor. The exact cause of Diogenes' death varies depending on which source you look at. Some say he died from an infected dog bite. Others say it was from eating raw octopus. My favorite theory is that one day he just got tired of living, and he just held his breath till he died. He left behind instructions on what to do with his body after he passed. Now, when people think of special post-mortem instructions like these, they usually think, scatter my ashes at 6:53 a.m. off the western face of Mount Rainier using my grandfather's favorite ladle. None of that with Diogenes. He kept it simple. In the words of Danny DeVito,
when I'm dead, just throw me in the trash.
Specifically, he wanted his body tossed into the wild so animals could feast on him, thereby giving back to the earth what little he took from it. So kids, moral of the story, don't judge a book by its cover. The man who appears to be nothing more than a shit-smeared babbling vagrant could actually be the wisest man you'll ever meet. Or he could really just be a raving fucking lunatic. Bring a knife, just in case. Anyway, till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, I was inspired to make this video while doing research on the ancient medicine man, Galen. Apparently, he would often do experiments on animals in order to learn more about the body, his favorite of which was the Barbary ape, due to its anatomical similarity to humans. Now when I say experiments, I don't mean push a button, get a peanut type things. I'm talking like Josef Mengele meets the plague dogs. He'd clamp their pee tubes shut just to watch their kidneys swell, cut their spinal cords in different places to see what went limp and what didn't, and squeeze their brains and make them go unconscious, to name a few. My initial reaction was, hey, that's neat, but then after some thought I was like, whoa, hold the phone. In 200 AD you couldn't get a doorknob even, yet if you had the right resources you could order a goddamn monkey. Many monkeys in fact. By the barrelful, presumably. Alternatively, if you were born in the right place, you could be the monkey poacher, making a living wrestling up some primates with nothing more than a net, a pokey thing, a hole in the ground, and a whole lot of ambition. So I got to thinking, what other kind of animals did ancient Rome have access to? Apparently basically everything that lived in this part of the map. They were particularly fond of elephants, and it's easy to see why. Sure, elephants aren't that big of a deal to the average person today, right? You've been seeing pictures of them since you were 2, big whoop. But imagine if you were a 20-year-old man who had never seen an elephant in your life. The closest thing you've ever witnessed is like horses, maybe some deer now and then. You get drafted, you go out to battle, you're a little scared, but you've been trained well, you're ready. Then, over the horizon, you see 20 house-sized behemoths with giant tentacles sticking out of their faces, horns longer than your body sticking out of their mouths, all screaming their weird trumpety scream, making your whole body vibrate like Mars himself is shitting on your very existence. So naturally, Rome loved to show these things off all the time, just as a display of power. Like, imagine if you were going to a speech in DC, and Trump rolls up with a pack of dragons. You'd listen to every word he said. He's got fucking dragons. That's what it was like seeing the emperor parade around with elephants back in the day. Of course, that wasn't the only use they had for imported animals. When they weren't being shown off in menageries, many of the exotic beasts brought to Rome were used in shows called venatios, which were basically like modern day bullfights, only instead of bulls, you had whatever crazy critters the state could find. Lions, crocodiles, gazelles, whatever. Around 55 BC, Roman statesman Pompey the Great decided to organize one such event, the feature creature of which was, you guessed it, an elephant. Unfortunately, Pompey forgot a crucial Barnum and Bailey trade secret. See, you're supposed to break the elephant's spirit before the show, not during. So the boys get to poking and the thing starts freaking out, just screaming and crying, even gesturing towards the audience like it was begging for mercy. Now the crowd at this kind of event was mainly composed of dirty, bloodthirsty peasants, and even they were like, holy shit, this is messed up. I came here for a nice family-friendly disemboweling or two, but this, just deplorable. Then they all start crying and the whole thing just ends up being a huge mess. Anyway, these types of spectacles became larger and larger as time went on. It's said that Emperor Trajan once held a venatio lasting 120 days, during which some 11,000 animals were killed. They also got pretty elaborate. A lot of creativity went into keeping things fresh for the crowd. In 203 AD, they had a model of a crashed ship built inside the arena, and an assortment of 400 animals were set loose from the wreckage and then killed. That's what we should do for the next Super Bowl halftime show, honestly. Just pack every team's mascot into a decommissioned submarine. Then, when they all run out, we have the troops gun them down while the national anthem plays in the background. Anyway, the ingenuity of the people organizing these events really knew no bounds. One time they tied together a bear and a bull just to see what they'd do. Unfortunately, all that happened was the stock market crashed. Also, fun fact, one Emperor Commodus is credited with the invention of a unique crescent-shaped arrow designed specifically to decapitate ostriches and watch them run around headless for a while. Seriously, they did that so often that they needed a device to make the job easier. Sometimes, just to shake things up, they'd have the animals kill the people, which was known as damnatio ad bestias. This form of execution was typically carried out using lions, but other beasts were used as well, including dogs, bears, and at one point even an eagle, although the guy was crucified first, so it wasn't much of a fight. So, moral of the story, if you ever end up in ancient Rome and you want to see some animals, you'll still have access to almost all the same creatures we see in zoos today, and the only catch is that something has to die at the end. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald, Hitler, all people who gained massive notoriety by killing one of history's famous leaders. But there are two Americans who committed an equally heinous crime as these three, yet their stories are seldom remembered, mostly because nobody really cares about the presidents they killed. Originally I was going to talk about both of them, but the video ended up being way too long, so today we'll just stick to, this one I guess. Charles J. Guiteau was a pretty silly guy, and to understand how a guy could be so silly, you gotta start with his youth. Guiteau was born in Freeport, Illinois in 1841. His mom had postpartum psychosis and died when he was 7, alongside 3 of his 5 siblings. His dad, meanwhile, was mega religious and made a big point out of instilling those values in his son, often physically. This influence molded Charles into a boy who sought nothing short of total approval from others, and who would react very harshly to any criticism levied upon him. As a teen, he moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan for high school. He tried to get into the University of Michigan, but he goofed on the entrance exam. So he did what anyone in his situation would do and said, well, so much for real life. I'm gonna join a commune. Specifically, he became part of the Oneida community in New York. In some aspects, this place was a pretty run-of-the-mill religious fellowship. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need, yada yada. But there were a couple of things that made it special. First off, they followed a doctrine known as Christian perfectionism, whereby everyone would strive to live their lives completely free of sin and
and reach a divine level of perfection while still on Earth. Now this isn't really unique to Oneida, but whereas most people would achieve this through staunch discipline and careful self-reflection, these guys would just get together and take turns roasting the shit out of each and every member over any minute flaw they could possibly have. Real great for the psyche. They also practiced what was basically an early form of eugenics, where aspiring parents would have to submit an application and be judged by the committee on their moral and spiritual fortitude. If they were allowed to mate, children would be separated from the mom about a year after birth and raised communally in the children's wing. After all, wouldn't want any of those hopelessly flawed toddlers to think they're deserving of any affection whatsoever. Oneida also believed in what they called free love, which meant that anyone could bang anyone at any time, as long as they kept it hetero, and exclusive relationships of any kind were actually frowned upon, which seems like kind of a weird habit for people trying to 100% FC this whole Christianity thing, but whatever. But wait, you're saying, how can you have selective breeding at the same time as extremely unselective breeding? Aha! See, that's where male continence comes in. Under this rule, a pair could go at it for as long as they wanted, with the caveat that the dude's not allowed to nut, pull out or otherwise. That way, it's not a sin. After all, as the Bible says, if the dick don't spit, you must acquit. Paradoxically, no such rule existed for the women. In fact, not only did the commune believe in female orgasms, they actually prioritized them, which is like unheard of in the 19th century. They'd even have the middle-aged women of the society train the teen boys in the art of holding in the old pelvic sneeze. That way, there wouldn't be any chance of conception in case the guy goofs up his first few tries. So anyway, young Gito joins this whole thing, and endured countless blows to his massive yet fragile ego, thinking he's at least gonna get a piece of this communal action. Except, the criticism towards him wasn't just a formality like it was for others. Everyone there genuinely fucking hated him, on account of the fact that he was a raving neurotic narcissist. He never caught a single piece of this allegedly free love, and after a while, they all started calling him Charles Get Out in the hopes that he'd leave. This is real. And after 5 long years of this abuse, Guiteau finally got the hint and moved to New Jersey. He tried starting a newspaper themed around the Oneida religion called the Daily Theocrat, except nobody cared, so that failed. He went back to Oneida and tried to sue the place in order to get back pay for all his voluntary unpaid labor while living there, but apparently I'm mad butthurt isn't a valid reason for prosecution, so that went nowhere. Finally he said, well, when your devotion to God has failed you, there's only one path in life left. Time to become a lawyer. He managed to pass an examination to gain admission to the Illinois bar, and subsequently joined a law firm in Chicago at the age of 27, where he met his soon-to-be wife, one Annie Bunn. Of course, Guiteau never really got to be a lawyer. He only argued in one actual court case. Most of his time was spent doing bill collection for random clients. This job gave him insight into how debtors think and operate, which allowed him to turn into quite the con man, dodging bills whenever and wherever he saw the opportunity. Even on the job, he'd frequently charge exorbitant contingency fees after the fact, upwards of 75%. And sometimes he'd just keep it all and completely ghost his clients. After all, what are they gonna do? Send another bill collector? Well, it turns out they did, so Guiteau and his wife fled to New York. Here he ditched law and started getting into politics. Specifically, he wrote and delivered a speech in favor of Horace Greeley, the 1872 Democratic presidential candidate. And he somehow got it in his head that if Greeley won, his campaign would be so greatly indebted to him that they'd fulfill his desires to be the Minister of Chile, as though a total rando like him could just, name a job and it would be his. In reality, the speech was an incoherent mess heard by next to no one, and Greeley lost by a landslide. As the years passed, Annie got real sick of living life on the run with a broke-ass bitch, and Charles was none too keen on her weighing him down either. But back in the day, you couldn't just divorce someone willy-nilly, you needed a valid reason for it. So Charles concocted the brilliant scheme of banging a prostitute and then having her testify in court. The plan worked, with the pair successfully divorcing in 1874, and the only downside was syphilis. Whoops. Guiteau started dabbling in theology again around this time. He published a book called The Truth, which was almost entirely plagiarized directly from John Noyes, the founder of the Oneida community. But despite being a man of God, Guiteau was still very much a two-time environment, and moved frequently in the dead of night to keep collectors off his tail. His brother caught wind of this and wrote him a letter basically saying, hey, maybe you should pay your bills now and then so you can be, a functioning member of society. To which Charles replied, and I quote, find $7 enclosed Post. Stick it up your bunghole and wipe your nose on it, and that will remind you of the estimation in which you are held by Charles J. Guiteau. God damn. And to his own brother, the madman. Soon after, he got arrested, bailed out by his sister, lived with her for a few months, attacked her with an axe, went to DC, rambled about religion to anyone who would listen, moved to Boston, got in a boat accident where everyone in his boat was fine, but everyone in the other one fucking died, took this as a sign from God, moved back to New York, and got back into politics in 1880, this time as a Republican. During this campaign, there were two main factions of Republicans, known as the Stalwarts and the Half-Breeds, which sounds like some Tolkien shit, wish we had names like that today. Now, Guiteau considered himself a stalwart, and in a similar vein to his 1872 venture, he wrote a speech to promote stalwart candidate Ulysses S. Grant, who was shooting for his third term. But before he got a chance to deliver the speech, one James A. Garfield took the candidacy completely out of nowhere, beating out both factions single-handedly. He was like, rats, how am I gonna get power handed to me now? So he literally just scribbled out all the references to Grant and replaced them with Garfield and was like, yep, that'll do it. He read this speech all of twice, along with handing out copies to the Republican National Committee. In reality, this really didn't accomplish much, but when Garfield managed to win the election, Guiteau was like, yes! That was entirely me! Garfield is in my supreme debt. As God is my witness, he shall make me a consulate in Vienna or Paris or someplace cool like that. He went to DC to await his inevitable appointment, but obviously nothing happened. So he started writing letters. A lot of letters. When that didn't work, he started actually stalking both Garfield and the Secretary of State, James Blaine, intercepting them in hotel lobbies, just being like, oh hey, yeah, it's me, the sole person responsible for your success. Say, how about a consulship? Alright, you'll get back to me, I get it. Whoa, haha, what a coincidence. Me again. How's that consulship coming? At first they simply ignored him, but eventually Blaine snapped, screaming, never speak to me again on the Paris consulship as long as you live.
Damn you, Garfield!
I sense a disturbance in the force. Maybe daylight savings just made Monday an hour longer.
Wow, Garfield, that was quite the wisecrack. It's amazing how you managed to keep things fresh year after year.
Burn in hell, beige dog. At this point, Guiteau completely renounced any faith in the current administration, and after a lifetime of clout chasing met only with disappointment, he decided his only option was straight up going postal. He convinced himself that it was now God's will to remove Garfield from this mortal plane in order to put his stalwart vice president, Chester Alan Arthur, into power. When he went to buy a revolver, he was given the choice between a wood grip and an ivory grip. He went with the ivory one for no other reason than he thought it would look cooler in a museum, and on July 2nd, 1881, he ambushed Garfield at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, shooting him twice in the back and mortally wounding him, all because he wouldn't give him a job. Garfield managed to hang on for 11 weeks before finally dying, which sounds like hell. Today's modern physicians actually believe that Garfield could have easily survived the incident if it weren't for doctors digging through him with unsanitized tools. Hey modern medicine, thanks for not being worse than literally no medicine. It means a lot. But that didn't stop Guiteau from being formally charged with murder. And that's exactly what he wanted. Matter of fact, Guiteau was over the moon, taking his new nationwide infamy as the fame he always deserved. His trial was just bananas, with Guiteau hurling obscenities at just about everyone there, including his own defense team, and formatting his testimony as an epic poem which he recited in full. He even dictated an autobiography to the New York Herald, which, get this, he ended with a personal ad for a nice Christian lady under 30 years of age. What a baller. When the guilty verdict was read, he called everybody there low consummate jackasses, and on June 30th, 1882, Guiteau smiled and waved to his adoring fans as he was walked to the gallows, where he recited a repetitive, deranged poem he wrote that morning, which was performed in a high-pitched falsetto voice, since it was written in the point of view of a child. He asked for a full orchestra to play during the reading, which I don't have to tell you that went nowhere, and promptly thereafter, he was hung. When the gallows dropped, people were probably like, ugh, Jesus, it's finally over. I just came here for a nice little execution. They subject me to all that? I want my money back, frankly. So it just goes to show, you can't always get what you want. Unless that thing is getting everyone to hate you, that's extraordinarily easy. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm salmonella, and I oop and I oop. Hey kids, if I learned anything from my middle school career, it's that what may seem like a good idea initially will often be remembered only as a foolish mistake. Here's a few pieces of technology from yesteryear that have since fallen into total obscurity. So I've always believed that there's no point in having many small things when you can have one big thing. Why have many shrimp when you can have one lobster? Why drink many glasses of milk when you can eat one udder? Why have many Cheez-Its when you can have one cheese them? Patent pending. And why have many street lights when you can have one moonlight tower? These guys were real popular back in the 1880s and 90s, often standing at over 150 feet tall and illuminating several blocks from a single point. Not very well, mind you. Matter of fact, they were so dim, we didn't even have the conscience to just call them light towers. Had to go and stick the moon on the front so people didn't get their hopes up. But thanks to our good old friend, the inverse square law, you still needed a fuck ton of light to pull this off. So they used incredibly harsh and UV emitting arc lights instead of incandescent bulbs. All the light of the moon and all the vision damage of the sun? Talk about a win-win. Sadly, these beasts have fallen by the wayside over the past century or so, except for in Austin, apparently, but they use friendlier mercury vapor lamps in them, so they only get half points. Now, anyone who's been around a baby long enough knows they always have a cloud of ghoulish stench hovering around them. Jeez Louise, somebody better air out that musty little muskrat before grandma starts drooping again. You could stick him on the clothesline for a while, but knowing that little moron, I'm sure he'd find a way to hurt himself somehow. Introducing the baby cage. Finally, city dwellers all across the nation have a way of unleashing their postnatal funk on the unsuspecting passerby below. These were in vogue for a while before falling out of style a bit of the way into the 20th century, because apparently society started deeming babies more valuable than air conditioners. I don't really get it personally, but this is also around the time we started putting lead in gasoline, so it's probably for the best we kept them inside all day. Matter of fact, it's my firm belief that without kids growing up breathing lead, there's no way pet rocks would have taken off in the 70s. Wow, alienating baby boomers. He's so brave and controversial. Now, in the days between the Great War and the not as great but still pretty alright war, people were trying to find efficient means of detecting an incoming air attack. They climbed their nation's tallest mountains to seek the wisdom of their greatest elders, and the wise men said, big ears. So that's what they did. These giant discs were known as acoustic mirrors and were designed to focus incoming sound over a 5-meter diameter into a single point. They were reasonably effective as listening devices. A few of them in Britain were able to pick up the sound of a plane from all the way across the English Channel. Of course, radar came along soon after, rendering these things completely useless beyond looking brutalist as hell. For real, instant album cover material right here. Ah! One of the Pep Boys is pulling a Spanish Inquisition on this poor wayward harlot. Huh. Just kidding. Despite the fact that this looks so very much like a state-of-the-art instrument of torture, it's actually just a beauty micrometer. Think those shoe size measurer things at Foot Locker, only instead of one primitive measurement, it records the entire topology of your face and skull at once. With this data, a trained cosmetologist would be able to pinpoint exactly what features of your head should be enhanced and reduced with makeup in order to achieve a maximum calculated attractiveness after you've paid for their services. Clearly this device must have been effective. After all, beauty is entirely objective. What, eye of the beholder? Huh. Check the name tag, buddy. Apparently, though, women didn't like being strapped into a birdcage and having their every minute flaw meticulously laid out in front of them, so this thing never really took off in the end. Next, we have the Humlauf. This was a device made during World War II designed to let infantry shoot around corners. It's like the Germans sat down and watched that part in Tom and Jerry where the conniving rat bends the gun barrel back at his adversary. They said, Mein Gott. They came in a variety of angles between 30 and 90 degrees, and even came with a little periscope so you could see what you were shooting at. But as we all come to find out when we reach adolescence, cartoons are the arbiters of deceit, because these things would invariably break within the first couple hundred shots or so. And even when they did work, the rounds would fucking explode from the massive acceleration, turning a deadly bullet into an ineffectual spray of shrapnel. These were so ineffective that only the 30-degree model ever saw significant production beyond prototypes, and even that was very limited. Say, you ever look at regular mousetraps and go, not enough property damage? Well, check this out. Patented in 1882, it's the revolver mousetrap, brought to you by the makers of the snail trebuchet and the cockroach claymore. Thanks to the marvels of the modern era, all those tiresome hours of intense varmint slang can be outsourced to one little gadget on the floor of your kid's playroom. Now when you hear a gunshot in the middle of the night, you can rest easy knowing that, one way or the other, there's one less pest for you to deal with in the morning. Boom. 1850. Steam locomotives are all the rage. You're in the transport business, but all you can afford is a couple dumb horses. Sure, they move things from point A to point B almost as well at a fraction of the cost, but your cool rail-riding friends called you a whack-ass and it really hurt your feelers. Well, have we got the invention for you? The Impulsoria uses an ingenious system of treadmills to turn that horse to be beckoned into a force to be reckoned with. Sure, it's expensive as hell to make and limits your services entirely to railroads, but just look at it. Instant pussymobile. Slap some rims and a spoiler on that, you're laughing. This machine is recorded at having a maximum output of 2 to 4 horsepower, which sounds about right, and it didn't see much use outside a couple exhibitions. Now, if there's one hobby that people in the past enjoyed, it's smoking. Whoo boy did they like smoking. And with every great wholesome activity comes a million novelty items to go along with it. Everyone's seen the long cigarette, but how about the really long cigarette? Want to smoke in the rain? Here you go. Going snorkeling? Hey, you know what's more important than oxygen? Nicotine. But hey, want to know the only thing better than a cigarette? 2 cigarettes. You know what? Fuck it. Have the whole pack. You earned it. Of course, if you're trying to cut back, you can always share it with a friend. Aw, how heartburning. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and check out this JPEG. Hey kids, time to alienate 23.9% of the United States from my potential audience, cause today, we're talking popes. Now don't get me wrong, the modern papacy is a great thing. Just a genuinely virtuous man being elected to govern and set an example for Christians everywhere, that's awesome. But back in the day, not so. See, in the Middle Ages, the church was one of the greatest powers in the Western world, having massive influence over monarchs and laymen alike. And as we know, with great power comes great tomfoolery. Here's some of the less wholesome popes that history has to offer. Pope Stephen VI assumed the pontificate in May of 896, during a time of great instability for the papacy, where rulers and families of all different shapes and sizes were vying for influence over the Catholic Church. As such, successive popes from this period often had different ideas about how things should be run. Stephen, for example, didn't much care for Pope Formosus, the guy before last. Why? It's complicated. Even if I could wrap my head around all this, it'd probably be boring as hell, so just take it on good faith that Steve had a lot of beef with Formosus. So much beef, or as we call it, papal bull, that Stephen couldn't even be happy that the dude was already dead. So he had the 8-month-old corpse of Formosus dug up, dressed up in pope clothes, sat down on a throne, and literally put on trial, with a deacon appointed to give all his responses for him. So you thought you could get away from the law with that little dying stunt of yours. Well, tell me, Mr. Thrombosis, did you violate canon law, commit perjury, and pretend to be a bishop when you weren't? Yes, pasta fazool, I am a fool. I've heard all I need to hear. This court finds you guilty, and everything you did as pope, we legally declare to be fake and dumb and stupid and dumb. Now throw him in the river. What? The river? Can he do that? See the hat? That means I'm Pope. P-O-O-P Pope. You better 3-point that bitch into the briny deep right quick, or I'm gonna raise hell. Metaphorically. So they throw him in the river. This whole thing caused an uproar among Formosus supporters, and after Formosus's corpse was allegedly seen performing miracles at the riverbank, Stephen ended up being overthrown, imprisoned, and executed by strangulation. The body, now slimy and disgusting, was fished out of the Tiber and reinterred in St. Peter's Basilica, where it rests to this day. Next, we'll talk about John the 12th. This guy already looks like one of my characters. Why don't we just, yeah, there we go. This guy ascended to the throne when he was just 18 years old, which is insane. If I was elected world's biggest hat wearer at that age, you better believe things would get real unpapal real quick. I'm talking gambling, hookers, setting fires, and toasting to the devil. And wouldn't you know it, these are all things John the 12th did. It's said that he took the sacred palace and literally made it into a whorehouse. Matter of fact, while researching the guy, I stumbled across this list of sexually active popes. This is a real Wikipedia article. Take a hike, toilet paper orientation, daddy's got a new favorite. John is featured prominently on this list, of course. He had a thing for widows for some reason. Personally, I'm not big on weepy old hags. I'm more of a carefree young hag type of guy, but to each their own. He also banged his niece a bunch, which not the most virtuous act, but you know, Middle Ages and bloodline, fucking whatever. His playboy lifestyle eventually caught up to him though, leading to the Synod of Rome, where everyone got together to talk about what a piece of shit he is so they could kick him off the throne. Besides all the deviancy, there was a lot of things they had problems with. For one, someone once offered John some money to ordain a 10-year-old as a bishop, and he was just like, alright, I would have done it for free, honestly. Look how big those robes are on him, that's hilarious. He also had a deacon ordained in a horse stable, just like, oh, for fuck's sake, alright, let's get this over with. Shouldn't we be doing this in like a church? Listen, bucko, if it's good enough for Jesus to be born in, it's good enough for you to have your little cardinal party. No, sir, not cardinal, he's just a deacon. Not if you keep running your mouth, you aren't. He also liked going on hunting trips now and then, generally considered to be something popes don't do. Although my suspicion is that they were just tired of cleaning his big stupid camo hat every time. Probably his worst act, though, was putting on a helmet, followed closely in second by the time one of his subdeacons got on his nerves, so he literally cut off his dick and murdered him. So between all all this and some conflicts with Otto I of the Holy Roman Empire, John was uncanonically ousted in 963. Except as soon as Otto left Rome, nobody was there to pressure him off physically anymore, so John was like, lol, just kidding, rounded up all his groupies, kicked the new pope off the throne, and continued his role like nothing happened by early 964. But just a few months later, fate caught up with John, and he died the way he lived. Committing adultery. Now let's be real, we all have our little guilty pleasures in life. Some people like a nice bag of Cheetos, others like scented candles, or poorly drawn educational videos.
Alexander VI liked watching horses fuck.
According to Vatican chronicler Johann Burckhardt, he would specifically arrange for his stallions to be introduced to mares in heat outside his palace, and he'd stand up on his balcony to watch them violently mate, which just tickled him pink for some fucking reason, and he'd laugh uproariously during the entire spectacle. He also once threw a party in the palace called the Banquet of Chestnuts, also referred to as the Joust of Whores. Wait a minute, horse jousting, horses banging. Was dyslexia a thing back then? Nah, but during the banquet, Alexander had 50 of Rome's finest raggedy harlots line up and strip down for him and his guests, which, by the way, included 2 of his children, which, by the way, he had many children, but at this point hardly a concern. Guests began throwing chestnuts at the ladies, who got down on their hands and knees and scrambled frantically, like the cook at Denny's when I held him at gunpoint, trying to collect as many as they could. After this went on for a while, Alexander was like, alright kiddos, game time. Whoever can bang the most broads before the night's over wins Rome's finest silks, and the only condition is that anybody who makes a joke about nutting on someone's chest gets disqualified. It's too easy. This is all according to that one Johann guy, mind you. Some secondary sources differ pretty significantly on the more lurid details of all this, so do take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, this guy was the official record taker for the ceremonies he was involved with, so it seems equally likely to me that the other guys just wanted to save a bit of face, but who knows. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey Majors, so I'd like to start off with a little biology lesson. When a species finds itself living on an island, it can start to evolve in strange ways based on the different pressures applied by the new environment. This is called island syndrome, and while it can manifest in a lot of ways, the biggest driving force is often a lack of predators. For example, the dodo lost its ability to fly since there was nothing to flee from. The Saint Kilda field mouse got twice as big since it no longer had to hide. And with no one around to bully them, the Sardinians started putting maggots in their cheese. Meet kazumarzu, literal translation, rotten cheese. It's made by taking a perfectly good wheel of pecorino and letting a special type of fly lay eggs in it. The fly babies then work to partially digest the cheese, rendering it goopy and wet and maybe quite tasty and worm-filled. Now, cheese as a concept is already quite suspect. It's clotted milk that you fill with bacteria and mold and let sit for a while. But cheese is safe and delicious. Cheese is my friend. I trust cheese. So my guard would be down around kazumarzu. I've learned to look past a cheese's childhood. Strange upbringings are what give them their character. But it turns out, those maggots are still alive. And if you don't chew well enough, they can cause enteric myiasis, which is a fancy term for fly larvae living in your intestines. Symptoms are similar to food poisoning, except with the added psychic pain of knowing that, again, your bowels are full of squiggly new friends. It's for this reason that kazumarzu is banned in the EU and elsewhere. A black market still exists, which is wild, and it's not a small one. In 2019, the illicit kazumarzu trade was estimated to be worth 2 to 3 million euros annually. Personally, I would just do it prohibition style, like definitely don't put these fly eggs on this sumptuous wheel of pecorino. But if you do, you absolutely shouldn't keep it warm and damp for a week. But although it's traditional to leave the larvae alive when you eat your mag and cheese, some consumers still prefer them dead, shockingly. In that case, one puts the cheese in a sealed bag, and when the maggots run out of oxygen, they writhe around and fling themselves all over the place. This is heard as a distinct pitter-patter against the walls of the bag, and when the sound stops, the contents are ready to eat, like popcorn. Shark fin soup is one most of us have heard about already, mostly in reference to its effect on shark populations and the wastefulness that goes into making it. Until recently, though, I never looked into the nature of the dish itself. I figured, right, the fins are just the only part of the shark worth eating. Big whoop, it's probably not much different from like swordfish. Apparently though, I had it backwards. Shark fins aren't even meat. They're made almost entirely of cartilage and collagen. They are the last part we should be eating. That's why it's only made into soup, because without being soaked in broth, it has zero flavor or nutritional value on its own. Their only redeeming quality is their unique mouthfeel due to how stringily the collagen grows, in structures called ceratotrichia.
Wikipedia. The texture has been described as somewhere between chewy and crunchy, which I find describes most things, actually. Other adjectives present on Wikipedia include snappy, gelatinous, and sinewy. The exact sensation of eating this substance remains a mystery to me, and the unintended side effect of all this research is that I now really want to try it. Like, it's a big trade. I've got to be the one that's wrong. There is imitation shark fin soup available, but I've already decided that it's not nearly as good. So I've come up with a compromise to this controversy. Everyone on Earth gets just one bite. Say there's 10 bites to a fin, 4 fins to a shark, 200 million sharks die, sure, a necessary casualty, but then we can end the practice forever. All done. You can finally rest, Mr. Ming. Come here, baby. Aw. Aki. What? Aki. Where? Aki. The aki is a fruit originally from West Africa, which is most commonly associated with Jamaican cuisine, where it appears in such dishes as aki and saltfish. These alien kidneys here are called the arils, and they're the only part of the fruit that's actually eaten. The flavor is on the savory side, being described as kinda nutty or bean-like. What makes the aki controversial, though, is the effects it can cause when prepared improperly. If the arils are allowed to completely ripen, they're harmless, but if you eat them too early, or don't thoroughly clean off all the non-aril stuff, they can cause Jamaican vomiting sickness. This disease doesn't sound real, it sounds like it belongs next to Eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings, but that's actually an official term, and as for symptoms, it does what it says on the tin. Plus maybe death. While aki-based products aren't outright illegal in the United States, they are very tightly regulated, and the raw fruit itself cannot be imported. So if you're American and want to try it, your options are fully cooked canned aki or going to Florida where a few people grow it domestically. Next we have bird's nest soup. This is another one that I've vaguely heard of, and for years I just assumed the name was a playful metaphor like ants on a log or shit on a shingle. Turns out, nope, this dish contains an actual bird nest. Not like a pile of twigs like I was picturing, but rather a specific type of nest only made by certain species of swiftlets. These nests are mostly made out of mucins, which are a set of proteins that, among other things, serve to thicken all those wonderful secretions our bodies make. There's a little bit in human saliva, a little bit more in mucus, and in swiftlet saliva, look out, pal. So all the swiftlet does is it finds a nice wall, starts laying out fat strings of slobber, which dry, and eventually she's got a nice place to roost. That is, right up until some gourmand says,
Today I crave bird spit. You can keep the eggs though.
And they then reconstitute it back into its original gelatinous texture. Unfortunately, these nests can't enter the US since, believe it or not, eating bird saliva is a great way to catch bird flu. And now the time has come to speak of the ortolan. The ortolan is a kind of bunting, which is a sort of passerine, which is a type of bird. They're birds. Like many animals, they have a long history of being eaten by the French, but what separates the ortolan from your average squab or pheasant is the unique way in which it is prepared and eaten. They're typically caught with nets and kept in the dark, which causes them to overeat for some reason. Once it's about twice as fat, the entire bird is then thrown into a container of brandy, alive, and sealed in. While this serves to marinate the creature, it also drowns in the process, thereby killing one bird with no stones. The ortolan is then roasted, plucked, and presented whole to the consumer, who inserts the carcass into their mouth, feet first. As they chew, one hand continues holding the bird's head, while the other picks out the larger bones. This whole ritual is usually performed with a towel or large napkin over one's head. There's a few explanations for the purpose of the towel. Some say it's just there to keep the aromas in, while others say it's there to, quote, shield from God's eyes the shame of such a decadent and disgraceful act. Yeah, this one I'm okay with not trying, actually. Notable fans of this dish include, not joking, Bill Cosby and the guy who invented the lobotomy. To be part of that social club. Our mission is to eat birds whole and then make people not remember things. Killing ortolans was banned across the EU in 2007. Not for any ethical reason, but because French people did this so much that the entire ortolan population was threatened. Thankfully, as of 2018, their conservation status is under least concern, so hopefully the French can get back to it soon. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.